Good girl. Sit down, sit down. Stay there, sit. Good girls. There's good dogs.
Okay, we're going to do this rather nice composite of geese flying over the marshes here and my two Labradors, the young pup and the black, just catching the sunlight. Sunrise with some snow, and we're going to do this in acrylic on a 2430 canvas. And my little sandwich box of acrylics here, make my own stay wet palette. All we do is buy a sandwich box with a lid, put in a layer of kitchen paper and a piece of greaseproof over the top, wet that, and the acrylics will stay wet for weeks. Then just open it up when we want to use it. I keep it in a circular palette next to it just to mix in. You can see my colours here, very basic sets of all I need. And what I'm going to do first in this case is just paint in these dark areas where the birds are, just so I know where they are, not that neatly, just basically. And once I've done that, then I've established those positions. I've already drawn out just the basic positions of the composition, and I'll work then from my medium tones out to lights and darks. So we've got the geese in, and I should paint around them, which is not something I normally do, but in this case, just so I know where they are, and also I want to establish where the Labradors are here. Although I'm going to paint a lot of other dark colours in there later, I just want to know my basic points of composition, I guess. And the same with the lab over here. We just get her in where she is at the moment. And then it's just a matter of putting all the right colours in. While I've got this dark on my brush, I'll just put a dark horizon across here. Establish some of these colours straight away. So I'm using a mixture of Prussian blue and black here. And there we go. We're ready to start painting the sky. Now for this sky, I want to paint the blues in here and gradually work those greys over. And grey, the simplest way to make it has always been a blue and a brown. Here we're going to have very much similar, but I might add a little bit of purple to it, and we've got some warms coming in as well. So we're starting with a fairly cool blue down here and working our way up to warmer. quite a lot of turquoise going on around there too. I'm going to use a quite large 1/2 inch filbert again, and I'm going to mix into my white. In other words, I want a light colour, so I'm going to mix my light colour into that. And to start off with, I want a very yellowy blue, very, very light. So a little bit of lemon yellow, don't want it too green. It is very light. Lemon yellow and a little bit of cerulean blue up here. And let's start with that, working back through these clouds here. It always seems very dark when I put it on at first like this because the canvas is white, and with a white canvas like this you tend to get the feeling that the colour is too dark against it, but in fact once we establish all of these colours it won't be. I'm going to make a variation of these colours anyway as it goes on. I'll tidy these geese up afterwards. Don't mind if I do cut into them slightly at the moment because it's easy enough to go the dark over the light again later. All I want to do at the moment is remove any halo, and then your white. Just remember where they are, that's all. As I say, it's all very light at the moment. Right down into here. Beautiful blue colours we're going to gradually blend through and reflecting with the sky by working over and over again. Paint the blue right through first of all, and then come back afterwards and start adding all the pinks on top. This in some ways is a little bit easier with the oils because they blend for longer, whereas the acrylics of course will dry very quickly, and you've had that, no you can't do it. Quite lovely green tints going on behind these clouds up here that I want to establish. The greys are going to work over. You don't worry if you go over your geese a bit because we're going to come back and tidy those up anyway. All we want to do is just know where they are. Right, now I've got the underpainting of those blues. I can start to be a little bit more specific about the colours. And where they are a fraction warmer I can start to do that. Because there is a bit warmer going on now. And by changing my brush strokes into different directions as well, I start to feel my way around these clouds. So even though I'm going to put yellows and oranges and so on here later, I just want to get rid of the white at the moment. Right, now let's start to look at the greys. I'm going to take some ultramarine and a little touch of burnt sienna. Make it a lovely warmish grey that comes in with that there, look. Coming up behind the geese, and just want to tickle it, I want to feather it in here. And I can make it cooler or warmer by adding more of the cool blue, the ultramarine, or the warmer burnt sienna, or even the burnt umber as I was using just now. I'm going to do that in a moment. I'm just feathering and finding my way onto the surface at the moment, just gently finding my way behind the geese. Up here as well, gently coming in. And we're just letting some of that blue glow through as the cloud gets mistier at the edges. This lovely effect of light and atmosphere. It seems quite strong at the moment, but when I put stronger on shortly, it won't seem as heavy. You see I'm painting over the birds a bit now. Doesn't matter, because I'm going to bring it back later. Just subtly and softly bringing those wisps of cloud in here. By subtle changes backwards and forwards between these warms and cools. We're ready to start on some of the pinks and yellows. Don't want it too garish. I think little rose would be fine. It might just be taken down a little bit with some yellow ochre. Don't want it too strong. So a little touch of rose or magenta would do. And a wee touch of either the yellow ochre. I'm going to use chrome yellow at first, maybe a little bit strong, we'll just see. And just subtly come in here, subtly as I dare. Because the white canvas is still there, it still won't look right until I lose all of that. One colour works against another. I'm just scumbling and brushing in this colour at the moment. I'm not using very warm colours yet, we're just using some magenta and a little bit of rose just to find these pinks. Don't want them too flash pink. I make a move back over them with a bit of blue yet, just establishing the warmth of them glowing amongst these clouds. A little bit of lemon yellow on the rose. And then back to the rose again into that. Make it a bit stronger in the pink. Come along here at the bottom. And that's one of the beauties of an opaque paint. Now you can come back in with lighter colours over the top of the darks, unlike watercolour where you've really got to keep light from the very start. You get the feeling of these mare's tails, these horse tails in the sky. The lighter areas reflecting within here. We want the much stronger, more orangey pinks, so we're going to have to go a little bit more now towards my cadmium reds, I think. Let's see what happens when I start to put a little bit of the warmer orangey reds in, especially down here. See the difference I can make, because I can make the cooler reds seem cooler. Try and get these reflected lights, feeling of these ones are cool. Colours shining up into here. Then we'll go to stronger still, going outwards towards the cadmium orange more, so we'll add a little bit of cadmium red to it. Softly. A bit of lemon yellow to cool it down. Got some muck in it there, unfortunately. Now back to the rose again. As we come across here with a slightly warmer, beautiful colours we can get to play with them. Start playing like Turner did with light. But it's this subtlety of playing between cool and warm colours. Every colour has a cool and a warm to it. Every single colour. So a yellow can be cool, a yellow can be warm. Lemon yellow is cool, and yellow ochre is very warm. I've got to play with these. I'm playing with a very cool warm now, which is more the rose, just to bring out these other warmer reds a bit more. Not too much, so I'll just take it back a bit. Right, now I want to go back with some of the lighter blues again. Turquoisey greens. Trying to make those up again. We'll just feel some of these lights against the cloud a bit more again. So we can play both ways with this. We can put the darks in, but we can come back and play with a bit of the lights that were shining through the cloud in places. We'll leave that at that for the moment, and we'll carry on with the water downwards tomorrow. I think we need to get a slightly lighter orange and pink into here. This one's not too bad, but I need to get a slightly more golden light pink going. So we'll get a little touch of the cadmium red this morning. Just see, it may be far too light, I think. A little bit of crimson. That gives me an idea of where direction I'm going. I need to be slightly more orangey, so back to the cadmium red. So the idea is to use these little short feathering brush strokes just to bring the pinks and blend things back in together again a bit here. Let the blue just glow through the... Now straight on down to the base here, and we'll paint in some of these lighter colours that we've already had up here. Some of them are slightly changed slightly in that they're going to be either darker or lighter than colours above. This first one is fairly yellow turquoise that I want to get onto here. It's quite a light, nice colour. The pinks are going to be reflecting into it, so it's lemon yellow and white, and then adding a little bit of the cerulean blue into it. We don't just paint the strokes, we paint across. We bring them downwards as well into this, so we can blend one colour into another. Go the way around into here. Need to lose this white. And we're going to start adding these warmer blues. Let's put the right colours in the right places and the right shapes, and hopefully the whole thing will start to come together. A bit more burnt umber into it now. Doesn't matter if we work over the wrong textures at the minute, I just want to establish the tones. Cools that are going on behind here, and all these little stumbles and scuffles start to appear to be something. Using a mixture of burnt sienna and ultramarine now, which is giving me a slightly greenier deep grey. To lay this on and then gently bring it back with a bit of water to blend it in gradually. I'm going to start to add a little bit of purple to it to really get some lovely colours going on back here. Just gently glazing it in at the moment. This will make those cooler colours seem cooler, which is what we're after doing at the moment, is playing one colour against another. A bit of this purple coming up into the clouds again, just to tint it a bit. And by using these different blues now, the ceruleans and the cobalts and the ultramarine and so on, I'm able to play these lovely cools and warms together to get the effect that I want. It's surprising how quickly a picture can come together, as you can see here. Now I need to just get a little bit more of these very light creamy blues up here and get the sparkle of that light shimmering in our eyes as I'm walking up there. Now we just need to work on the dogs a little more. I think we've almost finished on here. Just like this to be a little bit lighter up here, this pink. Just get some white and a little touch of rose, and see if I can't soften that just a little bit more. I don't want an awful lot, just needs lightening just a little, I think. Well, it would seem that we need to work on the dogs just a little bit more, because at the moment you could read them as shark fins on top of the water. Not going to be easy, because it does look like water being shiny on the surface, and the dogs are that particular shape, so I don't want to bring them out too much. We'll just enhance the silhouettes a bit. Then I might want to put a few little bits of grasses and things in the foreground here to make it look a little more like this marsh there. Now, such fine small work, and I really don't want to get too much into detail, although I've already put some in there. That's probably as much as we're going to do. I might just have a little bit more blue. The warmth of the sun just catching some of these little bits of grasses. Just a few marks against the flats to help the feeling of marsh rather than just water surface. Well, we're back from Scotland now, and we've done, or attempted to do, a couple of on-plein air works, even with the bad weather. What I'd like to do now, quite separately from that film, is a studio piece, one of the favourite shots that I took there. Beautiful photograph over that research lock up in Abundant. And I'm going to do this in both acrylics and oils. Start off with acrylics just to build the basic up, and try and be a little bit more figurative, a little bit more realistic with this particular piece. A composite where I'm going to use the photograph and, again, to be a little bit more commercial, perhaps bring a few grouse coming through to give that real feeling of Scotland and the wildlife that's there. So let's enjoy doing that in close-ups to see the brushwork as well and look at the techniques of doing a slightly more photographic piece of representational work. Well, I've set out my oil paints here and a few acrylics just to make a start on the sky and reflections. I'm only going to need white, yellow ochre, black, a little touch of ultramarine and some burnt sienna for this. and then I've got my fairly full palette of oils, although I shan't need all of those colours. The board that I'm painting on is a board that I had up in Scotland with me, and I found that the acrylics were resisting it, so it'll be interesting today to see how that acrylic takes to it a bit thicker. But it'll be alright for the oils, I'm sure. Of course we're going to do this picture and then add the birds at the end, so I want to do these subtle greys first, which are a touch bluer than I have here. First thing to do is a nice big brush to a filbert, and when we're mixing a light colour, remember to mix the lighter colour first. In other words, we mix the white and then the colour into it. If you don't do it that way around, you end up with a gallon of paint, and you don't want too much. I'm going to work from my darker greys up towards my lighter greys, so in this case I'm going to add a little bit of blue. So you do it this way around, you end up with far too much paint. Nice subtle darker bluey greys, so a little bit of blue. Blue and brown gives you a grey anyway. A little bit of the brown. So I may not need much black at all. There we are, we're getting the colours we want. A little bit more blue. Nice intermediate grey, and try that out. I haven't drawn out the composition at all. I'm going to work fairly intuitively onto this. I know that the horizon line starts slightly below halfway and comes up to about just a bit above here. So what I want to do is just mark it in. I've got this nice light blue-grey base that I want to put into here. We've got some wonderful effects to have to do into this later, but at the moment I just want to get rid of the black, because I want to work my oils over this, and the black will be fine for glowing through the darker background later on. So painting it fairly thickly, as you can see, because I want to cover up this black, and in this case these paints are covering it quite well. The other acrylics I was using earlier were resisting this terribly, and I just gave up. I just went straight onto a different canvas. So I'm mixing up my slightly darker greys with the various warms and cools, because it's some lovely colours going on into here. You see, by the use of more brown or more blue, I can make a more blue or brown grey. Don't use black and white normally, it makes things very sooty. Black is a very sooty colour to mix. The Impressionists banned it altogether from their palettes. So we'll go a bit darker still. The lovely subtle greys we can get this way. And so I want to work up my deeper greys first. It'll dry pretty quickly on this board, so I'll be able to work coats over it. You can see how I'm using the brush at a very slight tilt, not straight on and not flat on, but just about 3/4 here, in different directions to brush this colour so it's warmer. It's a bit warmer up here. Look at these variations of blue-browns, greys. Before I bring the lighter colours over the top in a minute, just little strokes, quite big strokes actually. With this brush it's a 3/4 inch filbert, a nice nylon filbert. We can get these lovely variations of warm and cool grey this way. Just letting one come over the other. Now the tip of the brush a bit more, and I'm just blending it in and across the other colours. And if we're really successful with it, we don't even need the oil on it. We'll just say, well, that's made it, and that's it. So I've got quite a warm grey there at the moment. Now a little touch more blue into there, make it a slightly bluer grey. You can see the warm grey that we had earlier. Now I want to come in a bit bluer with it. To here, this nice chunky, yet still subtle and soft clouds. So I'm moulded up into the sky. I should build them up. The thing with acrylic is, as it dries so quickly, is you can't blend afterwards. It's very difficult. So I like to try and get it done while it's still fairly wet. So I can bring those colours down below. I'm not using much water at all because I want the paint to cover this dark prime board I've already done in acrylic. Work our way across now and add a little more, a slightly warmer but lighter grey, and work into it. We may work over it several times building up these colours, so I want to get a really subtle effect of the clouds. I'm going to be fairly photographic this time. And work our way right the way across the painting. And as we've got a coat of paint on, I can add more water now to my paint and start to use a few more glazes. I can use the paint more thinly, in other words, to paint it transparently across the surface more. Mixing up some more ultramarine and burnt sienna, just a little. It gives me an in-between grey, not a cool or a warm, it's the use of both. And if I want to go cooler or warmer, then all I have to do is add more of the blue. I'm not using black at all. I thought I may need to, but I'm just going to use this variations of the greys, and I'm going to then come on with a little bit of yellow ochre and white to start bringing up the whites, the lights of the clouds. You see how I change my brush stroke as I come around, feeling underneath the clouds as well. And it's like different opposites. If we play rough against smooth, warm against cool, light against dark, then the opposite of each of those will be enhanced. So if I put the opposites in the colour circle together in just the same way they would be, and a bit more water in that, and I can start to just glaze it a bit. And more water still. You can feel these clouds coming over the surface of the paint and just feather them in, feathering being this tickling motion of the brush. Use more water to blend it, and one glaze after another, just gradually building it up. We can do this with oils, and in some way with oils it's easier because they stay soft, but we don't glaze as easily with oils. In this case we're glazing. The oils would be putting the surface, mixing the paint one into another, rather than just glazing over the surface because it takes ages for it to dry. Now it's time to start looking at the lighter colours that I want to put. So I'm going to start mixing some yellow ochre and white. So these are previous greys, just using the blue and the brown. Now a little touch of yellow ochre. It doesn't take much. We don't need lemon yellow. Yellow ochre is plenty yellow enough. I don't want it too light either. Gradually build up the lights. And you see how strong that is compared to the other grey. I want to start to find these lighter colours in the sky. I'm going to need to blend these a bit, so I don't want it to be too... With this oil I'd be just subtly bringing this in now, but it's not, it's acrylic, so it's going to be a slightly sharper edge. I may even use the oils over the top yet to come back into it. I just want to find these lighter bits of warm cloud, which again will play against, let's use it with plenty of water, which will play against the cools and warms of the greys. Just subtly blending the colours in, feeling the light coming through these clouds. Keep your brush going in different directions, feeling the light, feeling the shapes of the light as it comes through. To give us that beautiful transparency to this highland cloud that's always such a nuisance actually at the time. It was so wet we just couldn't get going. And gradually let our lights come out. So we're starting with the darker parts of the cloud and gradually finishing up with these lighter bits. Just tickle. That's why it's important to have a brush that's good for the purpose. This one is too stiff for watercolour, but it is very nice for acrylics or oils. You can try and feel the flow of those clouds coming around there, swirling a bit, and then we can go a bit cooler in places as well. And then I want to come back finally with an ever such light mix of the yellow ochre and white, just to get these last fluffy bits of light cloud shining in here. Having got that, we need to move down to the water. We're going to use the same sorts of colours because obviously the colours are reflecting in the water. So let's mix up our mid-greys again and get this basically coloured for the moment, just to, you see how that's trying to resist me then. And one of the tricks with water is to paint the verticals first, to paint the depth of the water first, to paint the reflections into that depth and feel the darks within the depth, and then bring the surface ripples, lights and sheens across the top at the end. Now, you can't do that as easily with watercolour because watercolour demands that we leave the lights first. But with this way of painting we can. We're going to paint very light details over the top with a finer brush later as well. So I'm mixing up some quite strong colours here now, quite strong greys, just to give me the base coat. And to bring the other light colours through in more detail as we go on. And a bit more warmth to the sky into it as well by putting a very thin glaze of yellow ochre and sienna over it. And of course back down to our greys here, which is where we were originally mixing, so that all our brush strokes are horizontal. Start to feel the depth of the water, as I was saying, and let those reflections shine through, as compared to the sky, which have quite different marks, more fluffy and cloud-like. And as the water has a slight ripple on it, we want to get that effect of the ripple. And we'll work over this over and over again, across and downwards. You can see how I'm using the brush vertically, the tip of the brush now, not the flat, the tip of it far more, vertically more than horizontally and flatly, and the warmth of these silver greys against the warmer greys. Just starting to play with the ripples in the water now, just flicking with the tip of my brush, just flicking across the top. This is one of the beauties of the filbert brushes, is that we've got a flat and a narrow edge to it. A little bit more water means that on my brush means that I can start to do these little ripples coming through. I could do this with a finer brush, but I don't really need to. I can use this brush to give the effect of these ripples down here, and I shall come back again with a darker colour in a moment. That's the beauty of acrylics, is that we can play with these glazes. You can see how I work across the canvas and then down into it as well, like that. Or the board, I should say, in this case. Let's go back to our darker greys, mix up some darker ones again, because actually it's quite dark in places. Darker than I'm getting now, in fact, still. Let's play between the horizontal and the vertical in the reflections. Gently dragging dry brush across the surface there to get a little bit of blending of the dark and warm over the surface of the water, not too much. I'm going to have some grasses across that yet, so leaves through there, so it won't matter too much there. But there's a darker area up here, which is quite important, of horizontal. Use the edge of the brush now to drag round down through there a bit more. Gradually building up these darks still. Almost enough. This is our basic ground for the painting. We've got the details to add in afterwards, which I'll probably do more with the oils. So I've got my ground there. Now I want to look at the darker areas of the mountains and hills here, starting with a very pale purple almost. I don't want to be using too much of my acrylics on this, because I do want to come back to the oils more for these more subtle colours. I'll just mark up where things are going. Just starting to paint some of the highlights into bushes and trees here. Having done my duller colours, I'm now starting to bring in little tickles of these greens to catch the sunlight over the tops of the trees here. very finely. Got to bring the dark branches over the front later on. Sunshine across the tips of the trees. What we're attempting to do now is start to bring out these much lighter background. I'm using a little bit of lemon yellow now, just the beginning of it. Just to start to feel some of this. A little bit of white into that as well, just to get a bit more body to go into the background. And we'll start to try and find these layers of light coloured trees picking up the sunlight behind here. Now it's quite golden, so I'm going to take some chrome yellow and see what that does. And these colours should help to push back the cools in the background. I think you can see what I mean. Even down to a bit of pure cobalt blue here now to try and get the feeling of the cool against the coming up into the hill itself, of course. Of course. Now we'll start using this light green to look at the surface of the water. So we've got most of our sunlight going on here now. We're starting to build up the much stronger, warmer colours into the foreground. So to cool that down just a bit, I'll put a bit of cerulean blue back into that with some white. And just cool that right back so we get the warmth amongst these cool leaves, otherwise I'll be standing up too much and I must be three-dimensional into the air. That sort of colour, you see it's not just one colour all the time that makes the thing work, it can be one colour against another very often. If anything, we need a little bit of warm against that as well, so we're going to need a bit of chrome yellow, just a touch of white amongst these, just one or two yellowy bits to make the green seem greener and catch that sunlight. Now we need to start looking at these darks and branches. The dark we want for the foreground is going to be Prussian blue and a bit of umber again, probably raw umber because it's cooler. And with this, to get the right consistency, we've got to have just the right consistency of paint, in other words, just enough terps to help it to flow. I'm going to start with a larger brush. Let's see, that's halfway there, it's a quarter of the way there, halfway, quarter, just inside here. And that comes down and all the way to just below the half, which is about here. Just mark it out first, up to here, and then it's going to come all the way through and round and down and into there like that. So it's fairly warm, it's fairly thick, that sort of thickness, and we've got to go from thin, to thick. We can't go thick, thin, we've got to keep it gradually growing through here. Now we want something a bit warmer. I may even have to come down to a purple, but I'm going to use some burnt sienna now. Come warm through there. Push that cool back. A bit of ultramarine now. As it comes down cool through this bit. You may have to wait till the paint dries a bit to really get this right, but there we go. Take a bit of purple, work that purple in there, that'll give me the dark I want, and the luminosity. We should go down to a smaller brush later, but just for the moment, is adequate. And just enough terps on your brush, not too much, make it too thin, but enough to let it flow. I'm still using a filbert to make these main branches. Like talking of smaller brushes, let's try a little round. It's only a cheapie I bought the other day, but let's see if it works. Sometimes usually these cheapies are horrible, but this one actually doesn't look too bad. Give it a go, shall we? Again, it's getting the paint mix right. Looks to be okay, let's find out. It's not too bad. We can do our little twigs and things with that. As I say, this painting is going to be full of detail, which is not something I don't normally do, but if I'm going to show you how, I might as well do it properly. Explain everything while I'm going on. I'm going to grow the leaves on the twigs afterwards. Grow my twigs first and then grow the leaves later. I've got to go ever so thin. I may even have to use a rigger or one little single point brush or something, because these twigs are very, very thin coming down here. And I'm making the point of the brush into a blade each time I put paint on. It's not just the point of the brush, I'm flattening it out against, as you see here, there's the blade, against the palette each time to give myself a much thinner edge. A little trick for getting fine brushwork. For those of you that said I can't paint photographically, well, if I want to, I can. But again, it's the same as you, it's your choice, you do what you want to do. I don't normally, because I like to be more alive and loose. But it's fun occasionally to have a little challenge like this. Well, that's one thing about a cheap brush, the end just fell off into the turps. Having got my brush back again, go back to the details on this, and it's time to actually start putting some of these little leaves in, and I'm going to again do the mid-tones and darks first, almost painting leaf by leaf. These little mountain ash first of all. Let the brush make the pattern. You just got to build up bit by bit by bit by bit by bit. You start to get the effect now as I'm doing this, you start to see how it's working. But it's going to take a lot of texturing. I might use a sponge in a minute to get all this lot done here. There's far too much to do just with a brush really. Right, take a break and we'll find the right sponge. Okay, our next job is to mix enough paint just to use with the sponge. I've got a piece of sponge here that should do the job for doing this textural work here. Don't use a fine brush for it. I'm going to use some burnt sienna. I'm going to use some raw umber, some ultramarine and some Prussian. A little bit of purple just to give a really dark colour. Maybe even a little touch of the Viridian just to get a bit more green into it. There we go, let's try that. Squeeze the brush out, leave it there. Now with a bit of luck, if I just use my sponge to dabble in the edge there, I should be able to get a nice texture, you see. Now the thing with sponging or anything like this is not to press too hard and also not to overdo it. You see we can get a very nice effect for the leaves, but maybe a little bit small actually on this one. I may have to go to a slightly larger sponge. I'm going to use the sponge on the slightly smaller leaves here. I may want to put some large ones on later, but I'll just get... Now always twist the sponge, otherwise you'll get a pattern rather than a picture about leaves. It looks as if you spent hours and hours doing it, but you can see from what I'm doing it's not. It's very techniquey, a bit slick, but if it does the job and we do it properly, it should still look quite professional. I'm going to get some larger sponge in a minute and do some larger leaves. And you can always drag the sponge slightly too if you want. So now I'm going to need some larger leaves, so I'm going to want some slightly heavy, more textural sponge, I have a feeling. I can find it amongst my bits of sponges. But already we're well into this tree. Now what I'm going to do now is mix up a whole lot more. Some of this I may come in and do with the brush as well. We can even start to use it onto the piece of heather down here by just pulling it a bit and twisting it round to get the effects of leaves. Again, it makes it look as if we've done lots and lots and lots of work. Actually, it's very simple. And we can do this with the lighter colours when it's dry as well. There we are, so we'll let that dry off next. Well, as you can see now that the texture of paint we've done is dried fairly well overnight. Being on board, it soaks it in. This is MDF, heavy MDF. And we were doing the sponge work here for the leaves using these two sponges, so we've got different textures slightly here, finer and slightly thicker. And now we want to build up these lighter areas of the leaves and textures, which I'll show you by just zooming in on the part so you can see how it's done. We're going to be mixing some lighter greens, so we need these mid-greens first of all, and then the very light ones. There are two different light colours here we can do. And to do that I'm going to be using these three here, the emerald, the yellow green, and we'll possibly be using a bit of light blue later on as well on the surface. So again, start with one of your larger brushes to mix, so you want plenty of it. And we're at a fairly mid-green in this case, so we'll take some viridian and some emerald. And a little touch of yellow ochre just to take it back a little bit, make it warm. And that should do it. Maybe a wee touch of lemon yellow just to give it a bit more yellowness. There we are, that's a nice colour. Now if I take that with my fine sponge, you can see how it's at the end now, the texture's there for the leaves. See here how the texture went on before. We did the fine work, remember, the twigs with the little round brush. Then we use the sponge to do the darker areas. Now we just want to start putting on these bits of sunlight that are catching on the surface, look, like this. So this is our mid-green tone, going over the darker green. We'll get some highlights of the much lighter green as well. Twist the sponge around so that it doesn't make a pattern, so that you're actually getting the effect of the leaves. And you can see when we go over a dark area here, how nicely it shows how these leaves textures pick up, getting out onto the actual sunlight here, all the way down. So that's how we're going to build up now the lighter areas of leaves. Now we need some much larger leaves, so I'm using a bit heavier sponge, a bit darker and warmer here in the foreground, so little leaves in the background there, but we need some larger ones to come forward here. And as I say, if we put warm against cool, light against dark, rough against smooth, it will enhance each of those as we go along. I'm going to have to come back in with the brush and do some of the leaves, but most of it can be done with these textures. Now I need some very, very light leaves reflecting the light. Green this time using the emerald and a little bit of white. And I'll add some yellow to that later on to make it even lighter. You see how we just can pick out some of the very light highlights coming down from the sky. So move the sponge around to twist it to get it to give you an uneven pattern. You don't want penny a yard, as they say, in other words ribbon. It's got to be looking as if it's an individual touch all the time. You need to get back from it as well and be able to see it. So don't get up too close to your work all the time. Do stand back and have a little look. Right, I need to put some yellow into that now, so there's my colour. Take a little bit of lemon yellow and mix that in with it, and a bit of white again to keep it very light. And we end up with a slightly warmer, nice leafy colour look. Take it onto the sponge and we'll see if we can add that to it. There we are. That's going to give it a little more brightness again, spontaneity. Remember, what we're trying to do now is actually paint direct sunlight onto our picture. We're actually taking these little pieces of sunlight and placing them in as highlights to catch the light, the ends of the little twigs and branches in this lovely reflected. Okay, now we've done the techniquey bit with the sponges, let's come back to the brushes. I'm going to take a little bit of Prussian, some of the dark mix we did earlier as well, and make my brush back into a blade again. And just look at these little areas like this where there may be just too much. But also, we're going to have to put in the little light leaves where they're required. Now, in this case, we want a little more chrome, more of the orangey greens, nice and clean, as actual leaves this time. So they look quite different to the marks of the sponge. I do love sunlight, I have a job to live without it, this is why I miss France. It does my arthritis good to have a bit of warmth and light as well. I think I suffer from SAD syndrome at times, in other words I need the sunlight. Light and colour to keep me cheerful and happy. As I was saying earlier about the rough against the smooth, the light against the dark, the cool against the warm, these larger leaves that I'm putting in now will enhance the smaller leaves. We're almost ready now to be looking at the warmer colours of the heathers. And talking of warmer colours, let's start looking at a few of those even in these branches here. And these little bits of red are very important because they're going to make things leap forward. They're going to come into the foreground of our picture. They're going to bring the eye, the colours forward and push the cools back. Now that very, very light pink I was talking about, we've also got some of that happening on the twigs. So I need to make a very, very light colour. And again I've got to have just the right amount of tips on my brush to do this job. We need some very lights coming down through these twigs here, catching the sunlight. So I'm making my brush into a blade again and just finding where these little bits of light come down across the twigs here. The light's coming from the left, it seems, so our little lines need to be on the left as well. Lots of lovely detail in it. These little bits of light are coming down into other areas too. I think we're ready now for doing the heather. I'm going to need to mix these colours up. Again, I can do some with brush and I can do some with texturing. Now for this heather, these lovely pinks and so on, we've got our roses and cadmiums and purples to play with, and some of that's going to be have a little cream added to it as well. So let's just start mixing those up. I'll take my medium brush and we want to start with our body colour, which is white, because we want things to be fairly light on this. So I'll take some white. Need to keep this fairly clean. Let's start then with our darkest of these. Some of our darkest, there's such a lovely variety of colours here, isn't there? We've got the ordinary reds, we've got pinks, so we'll add a little bit of red to that white. That's quite a warm red, and remember that in every colour that we use there's a warm and a cool of it. So if it's a red, there can be a warm orangey red, or it could be a cooler, more rose red, like this one for instance. Now look, I'm going straight across to my rose without even cleaning the brush. I'm making a more rose, We can go stronger and stronger with that. That it is just almost entirely rose. We can go into more purple with it. Let's take that into the white there, just to show you what we can do. And a more cooler of the reds rose. So now we've got the very orangey ones down towards a more cooler. We can take a more purple still. You see the difference in those from cool round to warm. So that just gives you an idea, even with those colours, what we can do. Now if I want to go warmer still, I could take that cadmium and put a little bit of orange with it and go even more orangey, and I could go warmer still there by adding more yellow to it and becoming much more yellow. Put more white in there, and now you can see all this range of these colours here happening down in our palette. So by using my sponge and these various colours right through to the pure red straight off the palette. Right, just for the moment to give you an idea, let's look at this area here. Take a little bit of my sponge, fairly fine bit at the moment, and we'll look at a cooler red for a start. And start to put those bits of heather in. How beautifully they show. Little highlights coming through. And we'll move to a slightly lighter one. Right through here. We'll take a little bit of white and mix it in with it. Actually on the palette. Come back into that. We get these lovely heather effects. Very simply done, and it looks like we spent hours and hours doing it, but we know we haven't, you know I haven't, you've been watching what I've been up to, cheating. Back to the pinks again down here. And let's put some actual almost pure colour on there now. Let's take some of the rose and work into the background here. And that gives you an idea. I'll just carry on like that. Don't overdo it, just find your colours. But I'm not just pressing, I'm dragging slightly at the same time on many of these, just to get a slight feeling of the bristles of the twig-like structures of the heathers as well. Going straight onto my palette now to take the reds off. Done my mixing, so I'm starting to use more pure colour. Right up to these flame reds. Wonderful flame reds here. God knows what it is, but some of these colours, you'd almost think they've been planted in a garden, they're so lovely. And how they leap out at us in the front, in the foreground here. Now I'm actually going back to some ultramarine and some cobalt because we need to play the cools against the warm still. So I'm going to bring in the texturing of the blues and the cools into here as well. Mustn't forget they still exist. They will help to make the warm seem warmer. And we come with areas of blue into this as well, which also links with the blues in the background so that we have colours coming through everything. Lots of lovely texture then. In many ways I've almost finished this painting, but I've got more animals and things I want to put into it. I want to put some grass into it yet. But I want to finish off here now, not with the sponge, but with my brush. Finally, I want the brush strokes to be slightly different as well, and this is another reason. I'm not just, I'm saying it a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but I do want to make it look as if it's not just sponge work textures, but just as I want them in a different way. Got a lovely abstract quality to this area now. And we'll go back to some of the ordinary golds to link with the background. Now I'm putting in a bit of yellow ochre, Just ordinary yellow ochre, not chrome yellow or anything fancy, just to link with some of our yellow ochres in the background. Really get this effect of sunlight. So we're coming to the end of just how painting the background, the basics. A little bit dodgy, so we just have to do a bit more work in it. Bring it back again. More texture there, here and there. Right, next is to look at how to paint the birds in. We would like some grouse, I would like some grouse in there. So I think what we may do now is play on the computer a bit, but let's take a closer look at the painting before we go on. The sorts of texture that we've now created. Here we are with another black prime canvas. So we're going to use an acrylic ground here with acrylics over the top. In that case, with acrylics over the top, we're going to be able to do a bit of glazing and using the paint quite thinly in places, impasto, and then gradually building up layers and treating it in between oil painting techniques and watercolour techniques, which is one of the beauties of using the acrylics. And I'm going to do this rather nice scene of a sunrise where I took a series of shots as yachts left Saltfleet Haven a while ago after the barbecue, early morning, and then I got a shot later on of some Canada geese going across, and I've superimposed them on to get this early morning of barnacle geese. A nice golden and silver light coming through. One of the beauties of this painting is we can do it with a very limited palette. All we need is burnt sienna, some chrome yellow, some Prussian blue, and a little white, and all of our colours can be mixed from those. In this case I started with a very dark acrylic ground. Usually I mix deep Prussian blue and maybe a purple, but at this time just a simple black acrylic base. By feathering the paint on, or by painting it a little more thinly, or even just using dry brush work or scumbling, we can let the black base show through. So we can glaze and make things darker, or we can allow texturing to happen, especially for reflections there or textural effects in the sky and the clouds. I started by painting white around the silhouettes of the 4 flying geese, so you can see them showing there, and then I painted those shapes in at the very end of the painting into more detail. Then I worked the white outwards, gradually moving into the lighter blues and mixing my greys. The primary colour of blue and then the tertiary colour of the brown, the burnt sienna, can give you some lovely variations of subtle greys, because you can move towards the cool colours with the blue or towards the warm colours with the browns. Adding white as well then, and then using the glazing effects of the dark showing through as I'm doing here, you can see these very subtle blue greys that we can get. By using just the burnt sienna and the Prussian blue, we can get almost a black anyway. So between these 4 colours we can work through from the very darkest almost blacks to the very lightest pale warm and cool greys. Of course with the burnt sienna and white we can get a pink, and we've also got our cream with the yellow and white. Then adding those together we can get orangey pale colours. We've got a whole variety of colours just with those few. Using acrylics of course has both swings and roundabouts. In other words, there are pluses and minuses. The paint dries very quickly, yes, which means that we can put succeeding coats on quite quickly. We can also do glazes much more quickly than with oils. But it also means that it dries quick enough to make it difficult to blend at times. So you've got to blend very quickly before the paint dries, or you'll be glazing or having to work new coats over it. With oils that's quite different because they remain wet, so you can keep blending or working them for ages afterwards. You can buy different mediums to add to the acrylics. You can buy retarders to actually slow them down from drying, and even some mediums that will even speed them up drying. Humidity also plays quite a big difference, both in watercolours and with acrylics. One of the most difficult times I had painting acrylics was over in Switzerland, where in fact top of the mountains it was just so hot that I couldn't get the paint from the stay wet palette on my brush onto the canvas before it was drying on the brush. Anyway, why not watch a while now as I gradually build this painting up, mixing this variety of cool and warm greys, and you see the ways I use different directions of my brush strokes to get the feeling of the depth of the water and reflections from this light, almost like moonlight though it's early sunrise, shining over the surface of the water. So often I see people just painting along forms, along an arm or down a leg, or just across water. If we're doing water, one of the best ways on still water is to feel the depth first, to do the verticals first, to feel into the reflections and the depth of it, and then to go across on the surface strokes with the horizontals more. Again, to give a sky with more depth, if we feel with the brush strokes the directions of perspective, especially one-point perspective, so we aim all of our little fluffy clouds towards one point into the distance with our brush strokes rather than just going across or underneath the clouds. It'll make a sky of greater depth, almost like the rays of sunset. Here you see me working all around these clouds in different directions, the rays of light coming out, feeling around the forms, the reflections and counter-reflections. Can you see now this variety between the warm and cool greys just by adding a little burnt sienna or a little more of the blue? I haven't even got to the creams yet. I've only just barely touched on the fraction of yellow into those clouds. And also how I'm constantly changing direction of brushstroke from vertical to horizontal, playing the lights against the darks, and also the textures and surfaces. Here, this edge of this piece of marshland, where it was black, and I'm coming now in with the deep Prussian blue and some brown, and giving it a slightly rougher edge, as if the reeds are breaking into the edge reflections there, and they're reflecting from the reeds above. In a moment I'll be painting the reeds on the top surface of that dark edge. Once again I'm starting very loosely so that I can tighten up to any level that I wish, almost to photographic realism if I wanted to do that. You can see I'm now working more finely on the geese, and I've been painting little highlights and reflections and ripples on the water with a rigger brush as I am now, so we can go into as much detail as we want. Well, there we are, quite a nice painting done all within about 1 hour 30 minutes. So very rapid techniques, giving us these lovely effects just with those few colours. The cold winter light of a Lincolnshire beach. Yes, it's a beautiful luminosity, and let's see if we can capture that by using oils fat over lean onto some hardboard that's been primed. I've put together a composite of some photographs that I've taken, and we're going to use a style that's a little bit more finished and photographic this time. I'm going to show you how to blend with a fan brush as well to do that. So instead of painting in my usual style like this, impressionist, broken colour and very bright and vibrant, we're going to paint much more softly. Right, today we're going to work on a long rectangular piece of this one, which is going to be two photographs composited together of the beach just down here in winter, and I'm also going to put a couple of seals into the left here. And this is one of the beauties of using the computer, is that we can play around with these compositions beforehand to get the right idea. Now, the different brushes I'm going to use today, I should only need 3 brushes. I'm going to use my little filbert here, a long handled nylon, a little flat for the find work. I may need a very small pointed later, but I'm hoping not. And most of all today, this example is going to be about using this fan brush here. Now, the traditional way of using this in oils is for soft blending, for blending clouds together, as we're going to be doing here and down the bottom. Now, the work you've seen me doing a lot of in the past has been very impressionist, and like these examples here, has been broken colour, little short strokes, which of course we can do little short strokes with these brushes. But this one really, in watercolour, it's great for painting trees because we can use it and twist it and go around painting all the branches and leaves, and we can do the same with oils. But the traditional way of using these was to blend clouds and to blend shapes and colours. And that's what we're going to do here. We're going to paint onto this white hardboard, which will soak the paint in. We've already hand tinted our own frame because I bought this just for a matter of pounds from a local junk shop, and we can do frames up from those very often to make them look really nice and impressive and save some money, because framing these days of course is very expensive. So we shall be blending all of these colours together softly in almost a photographic effect, not such a chunky painterly effect as usual, to show you how we can blend oils with the brush. Painting thinly at first, which will soak into the hardboard, and then getting thicker as we go along and blending softly in until we get a soft, very atmospheric, realistic, almost photographic painting. Well, we have 3 different blues in our palette already that will help do this. We've got cerulean for the cooler, more turquoise areas down here. Then we've got the cobalt and the ultramarine for the stronger blues up here. We can also, of course, change those colours and make them even greener by adding some more yellow. So I'm going to start with my little oval, and we'll work from our lights to our dark tones here. We'll work straight in with these ceruleans, with a little bit of cream into them, and then we'll work in the various mid-greys, and we'll blend those at the end. So I'll just very quickly show you how we're going to work those paints up. I'm going to start with white in nearly all cases on my brush and mix up some cerulean blue with that white, and we'll leave the clouds behind that we're going to paint, and we're going to paint those in afterwards. So with this very light cerulean blue and white thin coat soaking straight into this white emulsioned primer I've done, which gives us the lean, and we're going to put the fat paint, the heavier paint, over the top afterwards, right down to here. I'm going to make this a bit yellower later on as well, and this blue gets stronger as it goes up here. So we've built up now some cobalt blue into the ultramarine, because the cobalt blue is a little bit warmer, and you see I'm getting darker and darker and stronger with this blue as I come up. So the cobalt blue is warmer than the cerulean, and I'm just feathering it in, blending it in gradually to get a smooth surface, one colour coming into another here. And as I come up, I'm going to get stronger still with those blues. More blue, in other words. Stronger still with the blue look. And eventually there'll be even a little bit of ultramarine coming up into here, because we want this effect of the atmosphere and this lovely winter east coast clear light. The board takes the paint very well, soaks it into the surface so you can add onto it afterwards. It's quite nice to get the slightly directional stroke as well, as if the light is coming down from one angle. Don't be afraid to scumble, that is, rub the surface with the paint into other areas. Now let's take a little bit of the ultramarine, which is one of our strongest blues. We're up here, and that's as strong as we're going to go. A little bit of white into that, because it's still a bit too dark. It's a very light picture, it's a very airy, atmospheric light picture. Plenty of that ultramarine, but with some white now. Up here, and right down and through, and we'll even mix a little bit of the cerulean into that in a minute, just to bring that very lovely turquoisey feeling of the East Coast light back into this picture. So I'm just going to cover it for the moment. This is my fat layer. This is my thin layer underneath. And we're going to put the fatter layers over the top, and it soaks in so quickly into this board. It's not actually drying, but it's soaking in that I can work layers over the top fairly easily. As I say, don't be afraid to come over your clouds a bit here, because we're going to be painting the light over the darks. And I'm going to do the whole sky like this shortly. This is just to give you an idea of how it's done. Right the way along. So there's just a little bit of white showing where the clouds will come there, that's all. Right up into here, right through. I'm going to go back to that turquoise of my cerulean and take some of that stronger cerulean blue and actually bring that back up into here and just feather it into that blue to let one colour glow through another. It's not impressionism, it's not broken colour in this case, or hardly, because I'm actually blending those colours more together. All I'm doing is getting a little bit of this cool blue with the warmer blue, and then coming down into the cooler light areas below, like that, which gives this lovely luminous effect of the light into the distance. And we can just feather that in. Now, if I take my fan brush now and a little bit of terps on it, I can blend that in softly. You see how that works? And we'll do more of this with the clouds later, but I can blend that in with the fan with little tiny soft strokes. So it is in a way broken colour in a very miniature way though. Blend all of that in to get this effect of light. I'm going to do that all the way across the painting now. So let's get these very light creams in over here as the light shines over the horizon. So this is my lemon yellow and white and a little touch of the blue. Cerulean, which is our cool blue over here. A fairly creamy paint I'm painting on. Don't make it too terpsy. Keep it nice and light. That comes all the way across, and then these little clouds here start to get bluer. But it's still fairly light, so keep the white going in it. Mix some more white back into that on the board itself. And a nice cheerful painting, even though it's a winter's day. See how it's soaking into the board fairly quickly. Now I bring some more of that cerulean back in again. Pure cerulean. It's quite strong up here. Bit more terps into it. And we'll come back with our fan brush. A little bit of terps on it, and we'll just blend it all in together. So another technique we're showing you, which we'll use more of later when we actually start painting the clouds, but we just want to make sure everything is blended at the moment. Right, that's our blues done. Now we've got to start mixing the greys for the clouds of that blue with a little yellow ochre, and a touch of rose, just to get a warm yellowy grey going on in the background here, almost greeny grey. I'm going to add a little bit more rose to the colour just to get a bit more warmth into that background. Look how lovely that is with that greeny blue, giving us this distant. A lot of the work can be done with the brush that we're using. We don't have to use the fan brush all that much. It was just to give you an idea of how it could be done. Now we're going to have some lovely bluey purples coming across here. And we can make those browner and warmer and grey in a moment by adding some yellow and a little bit of burnt sienna, I suspect. But at the moment I just want to get these lovely fluffy blue purples. So I'm going to take some ultramarine and add a little burnt sienna to that, which will give us a much deeper or warmer grey for these darker clouds here. So I'm going to link in later on and blend in a bit more with the fan brush, as I was saying to you. This is now getting, the darker we make this, the lighter the sky is going to seem, so this is another reason for doing this. All of that white's going to go eventually, because we're going to have a few lighter colours, but not as light as this, not as white as that. It may look very dark and sombre now because we haven't got the lighter areas in there, but it will come back to life once I start painting in the pinks and the lighter greys. What I want to do is establish mid-tones at the moment and the darker greys. And back to our yellowy greeny grey again. You may even come round with a bit more blue into here again yet, just to bring it back again. It's a very busy sky. It's one of the reasons I chose this one, because we've got such a lovely busy sky here. I'll take a little bit of chrome yellow now, try a bit more warmth to this lower sky. But it's actually fairly warm, so I'm going to come back now to the yellow ochre and white. It's a nice warm yellow, and into that I'm going to even put a little bit of rose in a moment. Let's just get this colour going first. Just look at where these lighter bits of cloud are. There's quite a lot of colour in here. I want a touch of the rose, of a red, to that, just to give us a bit more pink in there. That's better. Look at that warmth and what that does. It makes the blues start to sing out. That warmth up into there as well. This winter sun just gleaming into these soft fluffy clouds that are bouncing across here. So we see the three-dimensional quality of getting, even just using these blocks of colour without blending them too much. It's a great way to paint, and oftentimes, and many would want to just leave this rough and ready as it is now without going into smoothing things out, which I'm going to do in a moment. When we get the darker colours down below, this will show lighter and make more sense still. And it's a little bit browner up higher, so I'm going to take a touch of burnt sienna and yellow ochre, just to give a slightly warmer grey with the blue up here. We've got some slightly warmer tones in the clouds going on up into there, as you can now see. So these are going to draw the eye forward and make the other colours seem cooler. Rough next to smooth, light next to dark, warm next to cool. These are some of our armoury of colours and ways of working and tones to make things stand out better. If we have the rough next to the smooth, the rough seems rougher and the smooth seems smoother. If I put these warmer colours in here now, then the cooler colours again will seem cooler and the other greys will work even better. So we get these lovely effects of the, not a sunset, but almost with this winter weather, it's almost sort of such low light that it's almost as if the light is about to fade down. Now, this is where our fan brush is going to come in. I've already done quite a lot of blending with that filbert, my round artificial sable, nylon sable, which is nice. Now I'm going to come back with the fan brush and just put a little bit of terps on just to get it working, and let's soften in these areas. Let's just now blend them in, swirl them round a bit and get these soft effects for the clouds. without them being too larger brush strokes. So you can see how we can use the fan to just gently soften these edges together if that's the effect you want. So you may want to leave it really rough and ready, or you may want to just blend them in a bit more, as I'm doing here, to make maybe a softer sky effect with your fan brush. So we don't have quite such strong brush strokes and it's all a little bit softer under an effect of light. There we go then, that's that sky part done. Right, next we need to come down to the landscape, so we'll concentrate on this area where the seals are here for the minute and just paint these darker tones in there. Obviously the colours down here are going to be stronger than up here, which is what's going to make those look lighter. So I'm going to use at the moment some yellow ochre, and we'll paint around these objects. The woman and the dog that I've got in the photograph, we're going to paint him later. The actual seaweed here is quite warm, but the colour coming down here is a cooler colour, although it's got some warm in it. So we've got a sort of greeny yellow happening. Let's have a look at that, that's better. Now let's just try some of that coming down here. We're going to paint a darker line in between there in a moment. Just paint that coming down, this greeny yellow colour coming right down through here. We'll see how immediately it makes the sky look lighter because it's darker than the sky. And it's, like I said, dark against light, warm against cool, and rough against smooth. And then it becomes more purpley, a cooler colour altogether down here. We'll take a little bit of purple and add that into that. So it's got this slight purple tint coming down actually into the edge of that. And just letting the colours blend one into another all the way down there. And in fact it starts to come across here as well. And I'm going to do a bit of underpainting now and use this colour, put some light on top of this later, use this colour to do my horizon all the way across here for the sea, because I'm going to put light in there later. And all the way down. A little bit of purple into that, a tad of white, just to lighten it slightly. There we go. We get this blue-grey that is all pervading, which we can link more colours into, blend them into afterwards. Let's just get rid of this white board at the moment, and we can see wood for trees, as they say. We can just see what's going on properly then. That's why I use a coloured ground a lot of the time, is because I don't like just this white surface. We need to get colour on. Cobalt blue into that. Look at that lovely grey we get. So that was a little alizarin, cobalt blue, and some purple, a tiny touch of purple, and yellow ochre to give us this warm dark grey of this sand. And of course this warm colour, using plenty of terps here to spread it out and soak it all in, that lovely warmth of colour will help to draw the eye forward and push these blue greys into the background, letting the brush just scumble over the top. Finished using our fan brush now, we shan't do that again, we'll just do that for the sky. What we're using now is my 1/2 inch filbert soft, just to draw these darker lines in. And not very warm, in fact deep purpley warm. It's coming in as lumps of seaweed up here. Got little bits of these warmer tads of seaweed coming right down into behind the seals. Let's really go a bit darker in there. Now look how dark that goes, you see. Let that just come down. Roughly in the background, just feeling this edge of this hedge. They seemed very dark earlier on, but now we're actually putting in some of these darker colours here. Those bits are seeming a lot lighter. You can start to blend some of these darks over here as well. Use your terps now. Thin coats now of just almost like watercolour, just glazing some of these dark strips across. Get the feel of these bands of mud and sand and bits of weed and stuff that are happening over here. An impression now of these bits of weed, grass, and this sort of late afternoon, cold winter, low light. We've got quite a low light in here. I'll paint details like the figure and stuff on top later. Let's just get these background darks and shades of blue-greys established, receding into the distance there. You can begin to see now how these bands of colour are going to operate and work, giving us this aerial perspective. Linear would be drawn perspective, as in an X shape to a one-point vanishing point, but this is use of different warms and cools to get the feeling of the sand and the land going back in colour. At the moment those seals are standing out like a sore thumb, so I want to go back and at least get some colour onto those in a moment, just to get them out of the way, if nothing else. Right, let's have a look at those seals. And just get a base coat down, even if nothing much more. We'll use a bit of yellow ochre and a touch of pink, just to get a basic tone onto those. Thinly, this nice thin wash of oil, just to get rid of the white. And then Mr. Seal down here as well, he wants a bit of work just to get him tinted in, get rid of that white. So lying there, slightly camouflaged by the put a bit more of the water around him, I think, to make him stand out. And maybe he's lying in a bit of water there, so we'll just lighten that area. It's wet around there. Lightens up a little bit and start to bring warms to the front, the way that the light shines across this slightly oily and wet seal fur. And once we've established some of our tones like that, we can start to look at these lighter areas here that are going to be part of the joy of painting, and of course these are reflecting these colours above. So we need to make some more of that lovely blue and yellows and blues, and just look at where they're coming. We know that we've got some lighter areas there against the seal. How painting in these lights, which is the fun part of it, certainly brings the thing back to life. You can see how I'm using the surface of the brush marks that I've painted on my priming of the board to let the paint come dryly over the top and just catch them. So I'm not painting straight into it. And I've got to be careful here because we need to get a thin line here that leaves a little dark edge at the top, because these sand flats have these areas of reflective wet sand and water, but also have the dark areas. And suddenly the painting starts to make sense, doesn't it? So we're using lemon yellow and white to get the cream with a little touch of cerulean, and now I'm using even more of the cerulean into it to get the blues coming on down here in the foreground. And then as it comes through there, there's a bit more of the pink. You can see now we're using a few vertical strokes as well to start to get the feeling of the reflections on the sand. So we've built up our underpainting. One of the things with painting water is not to just paint all horizontals, is to actually look at when there are a series of verticals in the water, and tend to paint the verticals actually first of all and go back with the horizontals over the top maybe afterwards at times. Get the feeling of wetness around the sand of on these seals as well. And some of the even warmer browns coming in here. which will make those cools seem cooler in the background again. And give us that acidy warmth that would be rather nice to get. An effect of glistening light from the evening coming on down through these soft sands. We don't want to overdo these seals. I mean, the whole idea of them is that they are hiding away there. We don't see too much of them. Okay, let's look at these small figures up here, and all I need for that is a clean brush for a start, and then I think we need the Prussian blue to make that very dark again, and a little touch of the brown just to warm it a fraction. And where do they come? Right, about here, about a quarter of the way up, so 1 1/4 here and 1/4, so they're just inside a quarter, so they're about there, which makes sense. Yes, we've got the figure, the woman, about here. It gives the whole thing a lot of different scale, because now we paint that in like that, coming down to her waist, and then her arm commanding the dog, and the other one just coming out like that. Almost made that too pleb there, so be careful. And her legs and down. Keep the shapes simple. Simplify the shapes. Boots are there, just catching into the water, and then below that they reflect a little bit. Front of her face. We come back to the jeans, and we'll use some of our cobalt blue. And we've got our figure. And then her headscarf. I'm just going to go back around her hand slightly, because when I did that I just caught the brush just slightly, and I want to make that hand a bit smaller. That's it. Now a headscarf, which is a chrome yellow, darkened down slightly. And there she is, that's all we're going to need there. And the dog next, same dark. The dog's back a bit about here. And we've got the two legs. We needn't even draw this in, we just go straight for it. The body coming forward of the dog, going back there, back legs, don't make dog too small. And the tail coming out. If your brush isn't quite there, well, use the end of it just to bite back in there. It's just standing because it's slightly darker in places along there, just to make it stand out a bit more, give her a bit more. We're going to have the occasional little bit of mess or rock or weed on here as well. It just gives it that perspective, that bit of aerial perspective, that planes I was talking about as we go back. We've got to get some of these warms here that we did earlier on a little bit stronger and looking a bit more like bits of weed coming down closer to us. We'll use some of these blues just to look up here a bit where the light's catching with the sand and making it a bit cooler back there, so that we push that, link this together, because at the moment there's almost a feeling of two paintings going on here, and we don't want that. The whole thing has to be linked together. Now we're almost there then. Just a word about this seal here, because it's standing out a bit too much still. So it's supposed to be a part of the picture, not taking it over. I'm not sure whether we need a bit more cool on there or not. Let's have a look and see if we need to actually push that seal back a bit and make him a bit cooler and just catch the light on it. Let's soften this back into there a bit, look. Just lying there in the half light. Don't want to be standing out too much. Just a few more highlights. This water up here needs to be a bit lighter, catching the light a bit. We can take a look at that figure. The texture of the paint, which we've used the board on, we've used the fan brush on the sky, and we've used the texture of the primer to dry brush work across the expanse of sand down to those seals. And you can see across the paintwork now to the figure and the dog. So this is the composition I'm going to do of these two macaws, and we're going to try the acrylic inks. In this case we're going to be using these nice FW ones. They're very strong, they're water mixed, but once they're dry that's it. So if you want to work into them you have to keep them damp all the time. A little diffuser or spray is useful for that. We can put them into the ordinary plastic palettes and use my watercolour brushes with them and water. As I say, just make sure you clean everything really well, because like acrylics, they are acrylic inks. Once they're dry, that's the finish, you can't move them. But we can use them in just the same way as we would with watercolours. Right, let's get into this then, because some wonderful bright colours to use. Here are a couple of the birds that we're going to use to paint from. Now in the technique of watercolour, we don't normally use white because we have the white paper, but with the acrylic inks we can go either way. If we want to, we can use pastel over the top or even paint acrylics in later. But we still will start with the lightest and brightest colours so they stay clean. You can drop one into another or one next to another. I'm going to start here with these yellow areas around the bird's wing, and into the oranges. And I'm going to actually drop some of the red into those yellows to make it a much brighter, stronger orange, to give them a much stronger and brighter effect. And use one colour into and next to another to get wet into wet effects as well. This is like the bird's feathers. To control that very carefully, we call those things controlled accident. First of all, we'll take a bit of our yellow and just drop it onto those areas, not wet into wet yet. Some of the lighter yellow, my lemon yellow here, nice and clean, and drop that into these areas of the parrot that we want that colour to be in. Thorough coat all the way down of the lemon yellow. Just give a graduation of tone. And now I'm going to add a little bit of a very light orange. And this is our wet into wet technique I was talking about, where we let one colour flood into another. It'll give us a nice fluffy feathery effect. And we get this controlled accident. Same up here, we want some of that orange coming in. Up here, now these feathers there, orange comes in and up. Now we go a bit stronger still with that orange. Into here, a bit more, slightly more flamey. Tad more into here. is these indications here. Now, while that's drying off, we can start to look at these yellow-green areas here. And if I put in the lemon yellow here and then bring some of my turquoise over, so if I take some of this lemon yellow and put that in on these areas of the parrot where it's slightly greener, and add some of the cerulean into that, it will give me that green, and I have got the greens here I can use as well. But let's be nice and fresh and actually mix our colours too. We'll take our lemon yellow, and because we're working downwards it's not going to flood back up into there. We don't want it to flood into that one either. That's drying off now anyway. If we paint wet next to dry, then it won't flood into the dry area. So we have to be careful that we time these things just right. Now, if I take a little of the green, add some blue in a moment, so we'll just tint in some of our light green here. If we want harder edges, we can do that when it's all dry. When the thing's dry, we can paint wet over the dry and get a harder edge. This is giving us soft edges at the moment. That green comes down there, onto his breast. And while this is still wet, we'll just tint a tad of that green into some of the shaded areas of this, just to give the feeling of some shadow into the bird here. We'll take some of the turquoise now, and the turquoise with the lemon yellow will give me a green anyway. So if I start to bring that turquoise in, look at the beautiful green we get here now. Because it will mix for us as the paint is wet into wet, and this turquoise will actually give us a beautiful turquoisey green. It would be difficult to get this sort of freshness if we tried mixing that and then painting it on afterwards. These really are techniques you can only get by using the paint freshly around these edges. You can see the variety of greens we're getting here now. While I'm on that and still on the turquoise, we'll use some of that thin down here. I can come back to here and I can lift out an area there with a dry brush, just dry my brush off and lift out a little bit to make it darker into that corner. And take a little bit of the deeper blue and just add it into there to give a bit of tone shading around that harder edge. And that is the wet into wet again, because now I'm dropping the deep blue into the light. It's the same down here. There we have. Look at those lovely effects we can get. Now, well, so you see that's how that's spread out there. Let's have a look at that bit. You can see here how the wet into wet is spread out, giving us that feathery effect. Okay, we'll carry on down with the light blue here, all the way down this wing. I only need one brush for this job, on number 6 in this case. Across the wrong way up. And use my deeper blue again where it's required, here. And to blend in a bit around this bit here, wet into wet effects, the fluffiness of those feathers, and let the wet paint do the work by gravity. Let's come up to the parrot's head now. We can leave where it is white, in this area white, but we want to look at the green on top of the head. So again, rather than go straight in with green, I'm going to come in with the lemon yellow. So, down to there. And then bringing some of the green gently afterwards to have full control of the variety of wet into that. So then, with my light green, I come in just tickling it in and letting the wet into wet technique, letting gravity do the job. We can go stronger by adding stronger green. we did before, in this case a little bit of the turquoise, and the turquoise in there will give us that lovely green. Just tickling it in around these feathered edges here to give this fluffy effect. He's got a slight shine on the edge of his beak there, which I'll just paint it over. Handle that. We can use them thinly like this, just like watercolour. And we'll work on the other parrot. Let's start with his beak. And now this one should be dry enough to do a little bit more of the details on this one as well. All the way across. We'll do a foundation of the yellow first. Now we can drop in that red, but let's start with the orange. Beautiful flame orange. You see how it's spreading out? We let the technique do the work, we let gravity do the work for us. Now we're going to put in these really lovely bright flame reds that we didn't have just now. Strangely enough, a little purple here now, which is on the opposite end of things. It's cooler because some of the shading in the back here. Just again tickling it in, letting the paint, the gravity do the work, letting it spread out. A brush tip, and just start to pull out some of these finer details of the parrot's feathers. Now we need to continue with a very light blue now. So I'm going to bring my water for the tail down to keep it clean, and just wet this area. Now down this bit here there's a very deep blue line later where the shadow comes, but right now all I want is a very, very light turquoise. So I'm thinning my turquoise right down and dropping it into this water to give myself a very light blue. Here it's a very strong turquoise. You see how much stronger I'm painting it up and around these feathers to link in with that earlier colour. If we bring this blue over that yellow, then we have the green again that we were after earlier. And we do want some of that green coming down into this, so we'll take some of the yellow and bring that into this blue we've just laid, so that the two will blend together a bit more. Then we have to change our blues again, because the blue here is quite a different blue. It's this much warmer. Start up on that top edge of that feather and we'll let it drop down through and create our feather shape for us. Just one stroke, and if the paint is of the right consistency, then all being well, we get our feather effects for the wing. And I mentioned there earlier about how that whole block here is in shadow, so this area here is all one big lump of shadow, and we'll come in under there. Stronger blue again, and just while it's still damp, just pick out these feathers a little, just to give a little more three-dimension here. We'll go back up to our oranges again, because in this area here the tail actually comes out right through there, and under here in places, with some more red and some more orange. Tail of two parrots, or two tails of two parrots. This area here, again, we want wet into wet. What I'm going to do first is paint, in fact, the blue area here, and then we'll do the lighter areas afterwards. We'll let that dry just a little, and you'll see the difference in the dry edge to the wet edge. How simple that was, and we get a slightly nice spreading there of wet into wet, only fractionally. Now I need to come back with my blue and make that a bit stronger, especially up here, and down some of these feathers. Very dark shadow that works under the whole parrot here. And some of that warmer colour to give us a bit more depth, some of the purple just coming down into here. Touch of rays coming on around here, these feathers, just to delineate where they are. Just a little bit more fine detail on the heads now. Very fine shading on the beak. We want it to remain white, but it just needed a little shading to make it a bit rounder. It has these rather attractive lines coming down. The parrot's virtually done. We can look at this bit of branch coming through here. I want it to just disappear into the background, so what I'm going to do now is to wet that a very light blue wash. I want it to actually disappear into the background here in the end. We'll let those colours blend down in. Same here. Clean wash of water all the way up here into this branch, because I want that branch to blend into it all. Doing a background, very abstract, wet into wet wash. We'll have some light greens coming into it in places. Right down here. Keep it nice and wet, keep it lovely and wet. And we go to our darker greens. Start dropping those in around it. And we can start to use some of the colours that are in the actual painting to give a lot more of the undergrowth and depth to this. One of the beauties of acrylic inks is that you can actually work them over the top at the very end. We finished our painting, but I just want to brighten things up a little. To finish off with, we can just use a little bit of pastel if we want, for the fine detail, and just bring some of the colours up. In this case I want to use a little bit of pink to bring up some of the sheen on these feathers with the reds. Need to decide what mount we're going to put onto it. We might decide on a lighter coloured mount or a darker coloured one. We're going to be using watercolour pencil, and the idea of this is for this botanical painting we're going to do, which is much more delicate, very fine, and we could use ordinary watercolour techniques, but I just wanted to show you what can be done with these watercolour pencils, how you can use them as a coloured pencil, or you can actually blend them with water and use them as a watercolour. You can link them with solid watercolours if you want as well. They're quite useful for doing very fine and very delicate work then. And we've got pastel pencils here as well, and we've got ordinary colour pencils if we need them. It's a lovely set, this. Anyway, that's the set we're going to be using, and all I need is one little round brush to go with it and the water, and we're away. Well, I've done my basic drawing in pencil. Now I want to go in with a fine line pen and very carefully put all the little details. Go straight in with the watercolour pencil, or watercolour now. If it was an ordinary watercolour, that's what I would do. I wouldn't bother with the pen. But I thought for this technique you'd like to see the different ways that we can use, different ways that we can illustrate something, different way we can use materials together, which again is what this film is about, isn't it? So I'm now working over the pencil with a fine line pen, and then we'll get on with our colour after this. Just delicately feeling the edges. Make sure that your marks are about the object. So if there's a broken edge on the object, then that's what you do as well. You don't just do tram lines around things with pen and ink or any pencil drawing. If you make a really good edge to a drawing, you'll need much less shading. If you make a tram line around something, just a flat, hard edge, then it doesn't matter how much shading you do, it's still not going to work very well. So it's important that we really do observe and look at how things are created here. And do very, very delicate lines where there are very, very delicate lines. So I'm just indicating some of these objects as if they will appear ghostly into the picture. Well, now the ink is ready and dry, the first thing we do is to rub off all the old pencil marks from the original drawing. We get everything back to nice clean black and white again, and then we're ready to go on with our watercolour pencil, which we'll do very delicately. For the illustration part with the watercolour pencil, I've got my jar of water and my pencils ready. We're only going to be tinting lightly, we're not going to be going over the top with this. So So we start with, in this case with these little flowers, I'm going to start with one colour over the top. We will start with our lightest colours. So we start in this case with the yellows in the centre of the flowers. And watercolour, remember, we always start with the lightest colours first. So all the centres of these little flowers. And as I say, already that gives us a little bit of colour and brightness to liven the thing up. Alright, we've done all the flowers like that there. Then we come in with the next colour. And the next colour for us here is a very light violet, which I'm going to put over the whole things. Some areas are lighter than others, so I'm pushing harder in some places than I am on others, just to get the tinting. And later we're going to look at the shadows on these, because we're going to need to make two different blues, and I only have one blue in my set, so I'm going to have to use it lighter, harder and lighter, unless I use, of course, the water with it to lighten it out that way. Now we come down to our blue. And we can start to tint the blue in, letting this mauve shine through. So you have to look carefully. There's no time where you don't have to observe. You're always observing, you're always checking that you're doing the right colours. So that petal comes underneath that one, therefore I've made it much darker. Much darker still under here as well. Very much darker, so I make much more blue there. And just gently come out here with graduating the shade out from here, so it's darker underneath those petals there. Here it's darker. Let's just see what happens when we dampen the brush down. And we can soften that in with the brush just to make the colour a bit stronger in places. There we go. And once it's on the brush, we can take it to other places as well. So if we're using that same blue, I can come into other places with it and paint with that like that, you see. Let that dry off, clean the brush immediately because you never know when you're going to want it again. We need to go to the greens of the leaves here. And for those, again, we start with our lighter colours, and I want to start with the edges of the leaves where they're a bit greener. So I'm going to use my lemon yellow here at first, just where the light catches some of the leaves. Be careful, there's a wet area, don't drag your hand over it. Just softening into the background of the paper to get the feeling of these leaves coming round behind the plants. You can see I'm doing a little bit of cross-hatching there as well. Not that we need very much, but just a little to blend. Take that dark down and through here a little bit just to tint it in. Now if I want to come back to my brush, especially for this one here, I can use that just to blend and soften in here to make sure the water's clean. Like that, those angles there, and maybe just a tad into the background here as well, just blending it round. Possibly here a little bit. So we can use the delicacy of watercolour pencil. Let's move on to our bee, and on the top of his leg there he has a little lemon yellow coming around the back here, and just a tint of the lemon yellow, and then there's a much warmer yellow. So we're going to take some of the around here, and actually he's warmer still yet, so I've done these bits over his body down here. outside of that to give that some roundness, you see. I'll just come in with a warmer brown still. In fact, a little sienna will be nice there. Even over the black, because it'll just tint it a fraction. Just around that bit. And even over the black itself to get a bit more colour. Now we come down to the flowers here, which are very delicate, so it's ideal for watercolour pencil. And we just want to shade those ever so gently. Again, I'm going to use a little bit of my violet and just ever so gently cross-hatch where the shadow is down here of the petals here. And we'll come down to these white ones in a minute. I've got to go back onto those with my light blue again. In the background here, just go over the top very lightly indeed. Just gently picking out. You see we can get the delicate colours there. And then I need to look at the very light greens that are happening inside here. Those delicate greens that are coming in through the petals as well. Actually linking into these colours. Quite strong there in places. Come back in with the stronger green in a moment. And look how delicate we can make this. I'm going to just shade behind here a little. Give the feeling of this green so that these petals stand out into the stronger greens. Blue-grey going on in the shadow here. Let's see if we can get some of that in too. Around that edge of that shadow, quite dark into there. Now these very light coloured mayflowers, they can almost be left white, but I want to just tint them. And in the centres they have a little pink going on, a little of the violet. So we'll start off with our lightest colours again, and we'll look at little violet areas of the stamens. Because we're coming down to this area now, and the bird. So down all around these little light delicate areas of the stamens. And we're coming with the delicate greys in a moment and blues. We notice in the centre of those flowers there's a bit of yellow going on. So we'll just take some of the yellow and tint into the centres as well here. Slightly warmer green. And just into some of these petals, just tint a little of that green under the shadows to link together everything. And then to our greys. Branches aren't just brown, you have to look for these colours. So it comes into because the bird is in shadow here, it comes in underneath the bird all the way through. I'm going to give the bird a coat of violet to push it into the shadow behind here. Bring some warms into this now. And get the shadow right and softer. Just to give a little depth to it. Not a lot, very, very delicately, yeah? To give it a feeling of other things happening in the background. Let's go to the daffodils now. And again we want to start with our lightest colours, so we'll come to the lemon yellow and go right the way through with the lemon yellow there. And you'd be surprised how much green there is in these yellows for the shading. I'm going to bring blues and greens over these yellows to give the effect of shadow in these petals. Now the greens I was talking about, we start to shade those greens into the petals where they are. Using a cooler, more bluey green now. We need some much warmer oranges here, so I'm going to come back now with cadmium orange. Start to work into here. And maybe there's a little bit of the orange coming into these warmer yellows as well. There's almost a violet going on inside here. There we go. And we come finally down to the cherry blossom here. Again, I'm going to need my violet, and I'm also going to want obviously some pinks now as well. I'm going to start with the pinks because they're the lightest colour. And there are a few creams in these edges of these leaves too. Surprising, but it's there. And then we'll start on our pinks. And to make that pink seem warmer, we'll come in with our violet now. And look quite carefully where the shadows are. Some's coming up behind here. Need to bring some of this colour across here as well, just to balance things out. Now I'll take my brush, again, make sure the brush is clean, and we'll just link that in places here. Peach blossom here yet, so let's look at those wonderful deep reds we have going on in there, inside these, because that's going to change the colours a lot as well. Maybe a tad more pink, and just touching into one or two of these. Okay, we've got 3 brushes, a 16, a 10 and a 6. This one's an oval, which is quite nice, and then 2 rounds, nice big brushes for the paint. I think this should do the painting. And we're going to make the background first and then work up to the middle distance and some of the texturing and the birds at the very end. For my base colour I'm going to lay on some cobalt and ultramarine first, and then add into that some cerulean blue. This acrylic paint dries very quickly, so I'm not able to blend very easily. I'm using a broken colour technique of one colour over another and then letting one colour show through that other one with short, quick brush strokes. While it's still wet I'm able to blend it in and use some water as well to soften it in. Having worked up the colours for the sky, I can then start to work in the distant trees and effects of hedges in the background. I wanted a fairly dark background so the birds and thistles would show in sunlight against that. And we'll work our light and dark areas of these leaves gradually up, letting the sky shine through behind. Use a whole series of different greens and blues to do this, from my cerulean blue through the cobalts and ultramarines. In fact, we can hear the gold crest actually in the background right now that I've been photographing. We give this illusion of something that's very complicated and detailed, had ages spent on it when it hasn't really. You see, I'm using a cooler, a bluey green now to give some distance to the leaves in the background. So we'll make some slightly warmer greens to catch the sunlight as it comes across these leaves. You see what's happening now, don't you? Well, I think it's time to start to work up the middle distance now. Catch just a few more bits of light on here perhaps. Okay. Next I want to establish where all these lighter areas of thistle heads are. So I'm going to make quite a light grey with a little touch of pink into it. We'll start off with some lemon yellow and a little touch of rose to start to just put some of these lighter colours in here. Well, that's given me an idea. You see how we get that thistle effect. So having shown you that, we can now go back to painting the darks in and put the lights in again afterwards, which we can do with acrylics, which we can't do with watercolour. Just give an indication of lots of thistle heads just catching the sunlight into the background. Now I'm going to start working down around here. Got to get rid of all these white areas of paint first before we can really work up the special effects. See, this board is very absorbent. It takes in the paint almost immediately it hits the surface, which has both advantages and disadvantages in fact. Got to keep varying between our different blues and blue-greens to get these background darks. To keep the spiky feeling going. I'm not painting anything exactly, I'm just using what's on my photographs to feel my composition as I go along. It's very intuitive as well, it's almost semi-abstract in the way that one does what one wants and what one feels right here. Not just copying or following photograph all the time. Get rid of all this white and then come back and put them back in again where we want them. See the variety of colours that I'm actually using here. It's quite large, isn't it? The different blue greys and greys that I can see going on behind that I want to get the effects of all these thistles going with. Painted very loosely at first and gradually I'm going to tighten up in my usual way. If I start loose I can finish tight. And so I've almost got rid of the white now. I'm still using thistle effects here to get the feeling of these leaves and thistles. I'm still using thistle type brush marks, in other words, of dragging it across and making little spiky areas. And that's a much better background to paint onto now. I can actually start to establish some of the deep blues and greens of the actual leaves. This is a very warm green, but we're going to be using much cooler greens as well. And what few white areas I've got now are nearly all to do with those thistle heads. I should come back over this with some darks as well, of course. And these lovely downy bits of thistle. Absolute bed of thistles. And this is just our base painting, remember. We're going to work over this in far more detail. And that'll do for the base. Before I start on the birds, I'm just going to work a few more of these darks, and as you see I've already been doing a little bit. Now I'm going to paint two of the birds and start with this one and use smaller nylon artificial sable. Right, let's get a base coat on, find our shape first again because we painted over a bit of it. Now I want to start mixing up some slightly darker shadow into that, because we can paint it like a mixture of watercolour and oil paint. This acrylic, it's quite versatile. The colour on my brush, I tend to like to use it because it seems a shame to waste it. Might as well, I've got it there mixed. So I've got the correct colour, we'll use it straight away. So it's a bit like painting by numbers. We fill in the shapes with the right colours in the right places and the things should appear gradually. That's where that leg should go, and then the other one should be here somewhere. So you need to paint a base coat over and then gradually work one back over the other. You can see how I'm using the tip of the brush now, spreading it slightly to get the light feathery effects. So we'll actually finish certain parts of it in one go. I messed my hand on here now, which I couldn't do with oil paint. That's another thing to mention, of course, is one of the eases of working with this is it dries so quickly you can work over it. Getting darker and darker. I still like to work from light to dark most of the time, but as I say, the beauty of this is that you can come back and work any direction you want. And so you don't normally see me painting in such detail, but this is partly to show you how, and partly just because I like to enjoy doing different things at different times. I don't like to be stuck with the same thing. Some of the galleries say you've got to do that to become famous, so everybody knows who you are by your style. But do I really give a monkeys? My signature's there if they enjoy the work for what it is. Again, as I say, that's one of the beauties of oils and acrylics, is you can work backwards and forwards and put lights on whenever you want. As I said in one of my earlier films, I do find that the yellows in acrylics can be really yucky. They just don't have the body, so I'm going to paint one on, let it dry. And then we'll come back into it in a moment. As pretty colours we can get. And we can paint the light over the dark, which is the beauty of heavier paint, acrylic paint and so on. A bit lighter in places as well. Let's see if we can flatten the brush out and dry it out a bit. Just use the very end to tickle in carefully some of these feather textures. And I think the rest will work when we get the other lighter and darker colours in, but you see the idea. Now let's have a go at the cockbird. Then I'm going to start straight away with the yellow because I want to get that yellow dried and established so that I can get a really strong colour on there afterwards. You can see the pencil mark showing through, so it does not cover very well acrylic yellows usually. I'll let that dry off and then we'll put some more colour over the top to build it up. So straight away in with the colour. Let's look at the shadowed areas, the greys. There's quite a mixture of shadows in this one, ranging from quite cool, like this one, which is more almost a turquoise. Let's get this white area covered so we can find the correct colours. Back over to here again. Carry on. And see where the colours are blending, because there's some nice warms blending down. I'll be painting all those details of that later. We'll build this up bit by bit by bit, gradually adding the feathering texture as we go along. Where I'm going to have the red here, I'm going to paint the yellow across now, so I can get that much brighter red again. I'm going to come back to that yellow again because it's ready for a second coat. And it's gone into slightly more of an orange as well, so I'll add a bit of yellow ochre, which will give me a richer orangey colour down there. A little touch of burnt sienna. Now, talking about these reds here that are going to happen, we'll go very dark at first. Might need a bit more purple even into that. Once we start to paint in the dark, you see how it stands out. You get all these base colours established, then we can work back in and get the drawing and the detail correct. I'll be able to paint all the rest of the birds so you know how it's done, and then come back to the background to show you that. Now we're coming on to some brighter reds. Some cadmium in here. Should really sing out on this. Wow, look at that, yeah. I've got to darken it down, in fact it's almost too bright. Let's bring it across that black a bit to settle into it. Nice chin there. Just a little dark into that at the edges. So we'll pull into that bird now. We can look at some of the shadowed areas again, the greys. Now, into the eye, just an indication of light shining. So very indicate the eye is there. Not a lot, but just indicate. The sun shining down it. And just see what's going to happen later now when we really start to paint these details in. And some of these shapes are going to have to come out and be shown more when the light's painted around them. Just to give you an example, you can see, start painting this thistle head in, and behind here, it will show behind that bird. The bird is a part of the whole painting. We can't just do the painting and that's right, don't need to bother about the bird. No, because the bird is a part of it. And it mustn't stand out like a sore thumb. The whole painting is one united object. So we don't paint just a thing on its own, we paint it related to the stuff around it. Even that bit of purple makes such a difference, you see. And make things come alive. See how that bird stands out almost 3D now. Okay, I think that's given you a good enough idea for the moment of how the birds are going to be painted. So I'll finish off the other 4 or 5 birds now, and then we'll come back to doing the final details. Right, well, we're down to our last detailed painting now. We finished the birds, as you can see. I might do a little bit to them later, not much. So it's really a matter of getting all these thistles. I'm trying to make these soft effects with those. So I'm going to mix up some light colours now, some cream. Let's just try the cream neat first. I've got to get this just right, the consistency, because if we want to use the tip of the brush and flatten it out a bit, then the paint has to be able to flow really creamily. A Series 54 Zero brush, so that should be fine enough. Let's see. I'm going to use this light to also help the bird to stand out a bit more. I've got a lot of work to do with these little pieces, just tickling them out. You can see we're gradually building up more and more and more of these thistle bits, thistle heads, lightly shining in the sunlight. Paint it thinner, we get a lighter, softer colour, and if I put it on a little bit thicker look, we get a stronger bright. This gives me my warms and cools of the sunlight catching over the surface. So I've got to paint the paint a little bit thicker if I want it lighter, or it would be slightly transparent and the underpainting will show through, which can work to our advantage, as you can see. But look carefully where we want these light bits to be, these highlights. At the moment we're painting this warmer cream on, but I'm going to put some very light blue in later as well. I put in my creams and now I've made a very, very light pink with some rose and white. I'm going to put a few more warms into this fluff to really get the effect of the sunlight and to make the cool seem cooler and the warm seem warmer and all of those things I was saying. We play the opposites in rough against smooth, dark against light and so on. Which will also help the birds because there's a lot of cream in the birds, and if we get more pink into these fluffy seed heads, then it'll make the birds stand out a bit more. It's a lot of work, but it's quite fun. You can see the effects as we go along, growing. Oh, lovely, that pink shines out. Beautifully it shines out there. And from these we're going to come into some yellow ochre, which will be a bit warmer obviously into these seeds. Very light highlights at the moment. We'll come back on some more mid-tones and warmer tones to make these lighter colours stand out even more on their own right. Yellow ochre and white, as I was just saying. It is a nice mustard yellow with white. It goes a warm, lovely warm yellow. Give some more depth to these. Back and look at some of the cools going on. Some of these little fronds are quite a nice light blue and shadow. We must keep observing. It's not just one colour, that's it, finished. We have to look looking at all these lovely colours that are there that are going to help to make this painting. See the difference that makes putting that cool shadow in there, because it will make the other colour seem so much brighter. Do you think the bird needs a bit more? Well, paint it. If I use this cool here, it's going to make the pink seem pinker, which could be good. We're now coming up to our final colours. We're going to start working a few of the darks back in again as well, and just bringing out some of these real warms. And there might just be one or two greens need picking out a bit. There's much more turquoisey green into here as well. We're almost there now. I don't need to do too much more. There's a few little thistle heads I want to paint to get a bit more purpley warmth in. So let's have a look at these last thistle heads. Sort of deep purple, blue. We're painting some of the darks back in again now, but they're nice warm darks. Look at the vibrance that gives, these last strokes that can just pull things together. This purple's rather nice, so we'll use it quite a bit. You see how it's just livened up this painting, and I don't think we need to do much more now. Very darks now. Just a little black in here and there, just to give those last bits of shadow. There we are then. I think we'll call that done. Voila! Let's not go too far with it. Well, this series of butterflies is going to require that I mask off some of the areas to show you the way we're going to use masking fluid, and hard and soft edges, wet into wet around the outside and a harder edge here. The masking fluid again that I'm using is the Pebeo, and I've got two clay shapers here which are very useful with rubber tips. One is a wedge shaped one, one is a pointed one, which is I think better than using a brush a lot of the time because the brushes get clogged up, whereas these can just be rubbed off very easily. In this particular case I need to make this a very sharp edge for the butterfly, a white sharp edge, so I want to very carefully put some masking fluid all the way around there, so that later on when I've done the wet into wet edging I can just tint that down, but it will look like it's been painted with a very sharp edge. I could do this by painting the wet up against the dry, but as I want to put a lot of wet into wet around the outside, it's going to be better for me to use a masking fluid here in this case. So I'm just using the clay shaper to paint in this masking fluid all the way around the outside of the wing, the border line here, where I'm going to be able to rub it away later. On the edge of this plant here, there's some lighter little dots and light areas too that I just want to pick up on. We're going to start the underpainting of this blue butterfly now, which I want to do a little bit of mixed media with, because I'd like to have the depth of colour under here for the blue, and then go over the surface with a very fine texturing of pastel, the Unison soft pastel, which I think will give the iridescence of this butterfly quite well. And then the background will be wet into wet. So first of all, let's put on a coat here, a nice even coat of a darker colour for the pastel to go over later. I haven't stretched this paper, I've only held it down with masking tape, and it's £140 Arches hot press, because I want a smooth or relatively smooth surface for this one, just to scumble the pastel over later. I'm going to just put a little bit of water over the whole surface first, so that whatever colour I put in will blend evenly across it. And in this case I want to start with a cobalt violet, which is going to glow through all over it. You can see I've already got the masking fluid on the edges, so it's not going to go beyond those edges anyway. And these are the colours that I'm actually seeing on the photograph of the blue butterfly here, this sort of mauve colour underneath here, this very light violet mauve. And then I'm going to drop in a few more colours just into that to glow through as well. There we go. It's got a nice even coat of that across the whole of the wings. So we don't want blobs, and we don't want, so hopefully those will blend out as we go along. And it gets a little bit darker, so I'm going to take some light red and just drop that in there as well, because I notice that there's a slightly darker tint underneath this blue, but I want to say glow under there. I let that go wet into wet across the surface, and it comes down here, down here, and in fact this bit here is slightly more yellow ochre, so I'm going to just take a little bit of, in this case, some raw sienna, not the yellow ochre, and drop that in so that glows through down here. The lovely effects we can get with the wet into wet. It comes down through there a bit as well, and through some of the areas of the wing. And then there's a little bit of deep blue going on in places, so I'm just going to drop in some of the ultramarine into these areas and edges, which will shimmer through the lighter blue pastel I'm going to use later. That happens down here as well, right down through the body. It's quite dark down there actually. I'll drop a bit more dark into there in a minute. So this deeper ultramarine blue that's coming down into here, which I'm going to pick out with the pastel, scumble over with the pastel afterwards. It's a light blue will come up later. Get the feeling of the veins coming down as well by just dragging this down and through now. Just let it blend. See how effective this can be. We don't want these edges getting hard. I think it's drying out a bit now, so I've got to be careful because I must finish quite quickly now, otherwise it's going to dry out too much and I won't be able to get the effects I need. I'll just let these colours blend in here. That's just about done the underpainting of that. Maybe a bit stronger in places on that blue, just a little bit. Just blend it in softly. And then there's some much darker on the body, so we'll take some indigo, a little touch of burnt sienna, and just drop that in on the body here for the darker areas, which we'll go over later, as I say, with the very light blue pastel I'm going to use, turquoise pastel. And these very fine details on the wings I'll put in later. It's just to get this iridescence that we want. Just tickling it in, letting the wet into wet do the work after that. And finally, the dry brush will just blend any little areas that don't quite look soft enough. And there we go. Now we let that dry off, and then we can come back in with the background here with the wet into wets. Now we're going to paint the wet into wet background with this, and I'm going to use an oval mop, and first of all soak all of the paper except for the butterfly, of course, and then drop in my lightest colours first and finish with my darkest and strongest. Now the thing with this is not easy to see where you've been. Fortunately on this particular painting, except on the butterfly itself, I've got masking fluid just around the edge of the butterfly's wing, so it makes it a bit easier, but I'm going to have to look along the paper, and the light's very dull today, to be able to see where the water hasn't touched, see any shiny areas like I'm just doing there now. Water hasn't quite got to. There we go, and now that makes the whole paper surface wet, which is very important, because if you're dropping wet into wet it has to flow. You don't want any hard-edged dry areas. That's what we're going to be doing later. So that's a later technique, is the wet onto the dry to give hard-edged ones. Now into that we drop our next lightest colours, which in this case for me are going to be Aureolin yellow, because I want a nice light green coming in later. So I'm going to paint a wash of that virtually over the whole thing where the various greens are here. I want to come back in with some raw sienna now, a slightly warmer yellow. Now I'm going to go down to some burnt sienna, quite different to the raw sienna, the same thing, but it's been cooked, basically, it's been burnt. Now let's go on to the greens. I'll take some cerulean blue and a little chrome yellow, ultramarine, and the chrome yellow. Very much darker green. Going on around this butterfly's wing. Come right up to the edge there, quite darkly. It will spread into it slightly, so giving the out of focus idea, but not too much. And this is where we're going to get quite dark now, so I'm going to take some Prussian blue and a little touch of burnt sienna to start making my much darker areas in here. I'm going to use pastel over that later. Come round the wing, this dark. And these areas here on this seed head. I still want it a little greener, so I'm going to add a bit more chrome yellow to that there. Lemon yellow is opaque, so it should just blend in a little bit of burnt sienna and a few more warms just into these bits where they've been lost with all the blues going on. Well, I've got my set of Unison pastels and I'm going to use these three blues out of it because I think they're about the closest. We've got the warmth showing through. We'll start with our darker one and just lightly, gently scumble that over the top just to try and get this feeling. This is purely experimental, but it should work. Not something I've seen done before. I'm inventing it myself, so we don't know if it'll work or not. But it does seem to be, doesn't it? I'm very tempted now to come in with a brush and wet this down and make it a bit darker because these pastels are going to show lighter against it, but not enough, I don't think. So what I'm going to do is, as I'm exploring and experimenting, is come back now with the brush and just wet down this paper a bit more and make that a tone darker, in fact. Go straight over all of this lot and give it one quick wash. I'll come back over with the pastel in a moment, but I know that these pastels are going to show a lot better against I wasn't quite, because the watercolours always dry a tone lighter, and that's what's happened here as well. Now we let that dry, then we'll work back over with the pastels again. We're working between watercolour and pastel. You can actually mix the pastel with the water, of course, as well. Right, we've still got some masking fluid here to remove as well, and that bit of seed head, because I haven't quite finished painting that yet. And now this is ready to put more pastel onto. So we'll continue with the pastel first of all, and we'll go back to that seed head because it can work anyway in any direction we want to. At the moment we're just putting on another mid blue, just following it through over this, just scumbling it over the surface. This is why I wanted a smooth surface paper, because it'll just take the pastel lightly without too much texture. You can do a little bit of soft blending, but we don't want to lose the brightness of the pastel. If we blend it, we lose that lovely bright quality of the pastel. We don't want that. I think it might be nice to go for slightly deeper blue as well. Let's have a look at our lovely cobalt blue that's in here, and I just want to tickle in a little bit of that lovely cobalt blue that has been lost in the watercolour. Just look at that beautiful blue we can get there, look. Just tickling it in. I don't know what you think, but I think that's quite attractive and it's not something we could have got as vibrantly just with the watercolour alone. So I'm saying, by all means, experiment with mixed media and don't just do what the books say or teacher says. If you want to explore and experiment, you do it. And I'd say we'd almost finished this painting now. We don't do too much more to it. Maybe a few little details here and there. And there's our blue butterfly, iridescently shining out. There we go. One blue butterfly. Now on this particular painting, the butterfly is going to be carefully painted before the background, but I want to mask off these flowers so that they can be painted at the very end. I'm back with my chisel-shaped clay shaper, and we'll paint in all of these yellows. You see we've blocked in a lot of the areas here. It'll all make sense later on. It saves a lot of very careful painting around, and we can be very loose with our wet into wet then to allow the shapes to blend right across this rather than having a jump from one side to another. Just painted the male blue, which is the bright blue one. Now we're going to have a go at the female, which is, in this case we're doing the underwings, and she's sitting on some ragwort flower, which is rather attractive. So I've already done my masking, as you can see. That's going to come off towards the end. First of all, we're going to paint the butterfly, then the wet into wet background, and then we're going to go back into those flowers and finish those off at the end. So we'll just zoom in now on the butterfly itself, because that's where we're going now. We've got to paint the butterfly fairly carefully. I'm actually painting upside down here. I'm going to be using two brushes, two and a number 8 brush for this, and then a mop at the end. We'll start off with the slightly larger brush. We're going to just paint very, very carefully, from the lights to the darks again, a darker tint. I've got to leave all these light areas to tint in afterwards. I've just got to paint carefully now. I could put masking fluid into these small areas too, but I'm not going to. Now I can drop into this while it's still dark colour, and it's still a tad of the green coming into it just to bring it down, because it's quite a dull undercolour here. And it's very green into that edge there, so we'll let that come right the way around. It's quite green, so I'm going to take a bit of Viridian and drop that in. Maybe a little bit bright, so I'll drop some of the other colour back in a moment. And a wee tad of purple into little bits of it, just to give the texture that we need here. Coming down to the body, there's a small touch of ultramarine. Through there. And into the eye there. Into these areas, I want to go stronger yet. Use a little touch of purple now with my burnt sienna and darken up this whole front wing area here. Fairly carefully, we're actually drawing with the brush, so you see I've already drawn out quite a careful drawing, haven't I? And into that we'll add a bit of blue, a bit of ultramarine at the front here again to bring it, darken it down a fraction. Right the way through there. Work on this bit here now. There's some quite nice oranges going on. I'm going to take some cadmium orange. Into that I'm going to drop a little bit of rose in a moment. It comes down into other places here too. Rose into the cadmium orange, and it will just drop it in wet into wet again. Just softening it in with the clean water. Let it reach up and blend. They are light, but they're now toned down slightly. Make a colour for these darks. Don't need to go to a smaller brush yet. I'm going to use some brushes of purple because they're quite cool and they're very dark. Just paint those in. Look how lovely and dark they look against that. A bit wet there, be careful it doesn't spread too far. As it dries out now, a little bit more of the detail, the veins and so on, are running through here, right between here and these. To rest my hand on to make an arch to paint that line all the way down. We're painting wet over dry, which means we do get these hard edges. the little feathered edges very carefully with the tip of the brush. So I haven't needed to go to my very small brush yet. I may need to drop any colour back into here. We can do that any time we like. And that's our butterfly about there. A little bit of cobalt violet to this wing, a little bit of cool to soften that in. There we go. We'll let that dry. And we'll come back to our wetting to wet. Right, now it's time to go on to the background. We've got the basic butterfly done. We're going to do the flowers afterwards. So first I'm going to wet all of the paper with a big oval mop. I didn't need to use my small brush after all. So all the way around. Be careful you don't go onto the butterfly because you want this liquid to stop before it reaches the butterfly. Then onto that we'll drop our lighter colour straight away and work in wetting to wet from very light to much darker as we go along. I've left that area there because I want to be able to wet into wet yellow in the centre there in a minute. So we get an out of focus blurry effect for the background. Drop that in. Our little burnt sienna and the sap green make a much warmer green. You can give the feeling of leaves and grasses going onto here a bit there. Let's drop in some much deeper, some ultramarine now with some burnt sienna in it to really get some darks going. There we go, don't need much more than that. Got a tad darker but not much. Dry off. Now while that's drying, the centre part of this, we wanted to do a little bit of more yellow into that. So I'm just going to drop in some chrome yellow into there, where there isn't any. Dry my brush out again and suck some of it away. Some of it's going over the masking fluid anyway. You can see how it leaves me a lighter yellow there. Okay, the paper should be just dry enough now to remove the masking fluid. So I prefer to use a bit of cloth with this. It lifts it a bit easier, it grasps it. Right, that makes it ready for us now to put to our next stage of painting these flowers in. And I'm going to give it all one coat of Orionian yellow to start. When that's dry, I shall work over the darker yellows afterwards. We can afford to make the effect of the stems by bringing some of that yellow across it anyway. That dry, then we'll work up our petals bit by bit with the stronger yellows. We're going to work on this area, still with our medium brush, and I'm going on to some chrome yellow. Keep it nice and clean. Chrome yellow's a little bit more opaque, and we're going to work a bit more thinly at first into this lighter yellow. Go darker into this yet in a moment, so nice strong vibrant yellow for the poisonous flowers of the ragwort, well, the poisonous leaves of the ragwort, so we get much stronger, darker, sharper edges. These are going to be much darker later as well, but I'll just paint them in at the moment. Paint this being a much more opaque paint. You can paint it on as thickly as you like because it's not going to show as transparent anyway. Chrome yellow. Put a little bit of rose with a lovely orangey red to drop in here. Nice and warm. And then we've got this one, which is right through here, the same sort of colour, and there are shorter petals coming closer inside, which are probably a little bit warmer. Burnt sienna under here, and just bring in some of the shadows on these petals here. Thin that down a bit. We could do a little bit of glazing over the petals here, just to give a bit more three-dimensional quality just there with those. Coming back to a little bit of cobalt and come in with some blues in between these petals a bit. And this here actually is quite a strong green, so I'm going to come back to my dark bits in between. Don't let the brush get too dry, keep it fluid, and we're still using watercolour. Now we need to come up and dot the I's and cross the T's. So I'm just going to bring a little bit of purple in because purple is the opposite in the colour circle. And I reckon I need to use a thin brush now because I've got to do one of the antennae. But if we use that purple now, we should end up with quite a nice dark. And we can go back to the other brush again and just tart up some of these colours a bit. Gives it that nice and seeing, that little bit of vibrance that we didn't have before. Separate those petals out. And we're probably about there, you know. Well, there we are, there's our male blue butterfly. A bit of drawing to do here and there. Just the odd petal shape to bring out. And there we are. I think we can finish at that. Well, carrying on with the Norfolk theme and also doing a test on some watercolour paper the SAA gave me, I'm going to do a great crested grebe, and this time in watercolour. And all I'm going to need today are my oval mop, my Pro Art oval mop, a little brush called a silver rake, this large one, again another specialist brush from the SAA because it's going to be ideal for the feathers, and a size 5 and a size 2 watercolour brush. I'm going to also use a little bit of masking fluid from your applicator, which is ideal for little bubbles and things around here. And that's it, my standard set of watercolours here, and palette, and of course water, and that's all I should need for this painting. So I'll take you close up to this and we'll look at some of the special techniques we can use to get these effects. Now the first thing I'm going to do is use the masking fluid applicator to drop these little blobs and dashes of masking fluid where the bubbles are going to go sparkling on top of the water. This is normally done with the board flat, but as I'm working vertically here I thought I'd just do that to show you. We're not going to be doing any fine lines with this, just these little water droplets, just these little bubbles. Masking fluid's now dry enough to work on. So we'll make a start, and we'll do the bird first I think and paint the water afterwards. So I'm going to start with my little medium round brush, and we want to work in watercolour from the light to the dark, so we're going to work up from the whitey areas to the darkest ones, and there'll be a bit of texture on this as well. Working on a fairly small scale here, so I've got to use fairly small brushes. The beak here has a slightly purple tint to it, so I'm going to take a little bit of alizarin and just bring that across the beak thinly first of all, to give that a thin wash. Remember that the wash is the first coat we do, and any transparent coat after that over it is called a glaze. So this is a thin wash of that. I'm going to take a little bit of Prussian blue and a wee touch of burnt sienna to go into that, and to make it slightly darker, and just drop it. I'm working on the vertical here, so I'm just going to drop that down and in here, and it's still slightly wet, so it's going to just blend down a little bit into that alizarin below. Put it down too much. That comes right up and across the beak here, up into the eye. Very, very small area to paint, so I can't now we'll just let that dry for a little bit now, as it's just blending in. Take a touch of water, clean brush, and just blend that together there like that. Look, just get that to softly blend in before I put a darker colour onto it later. Coming through here, I'm going to take some raw sienna and just put a thin wash of that up into here. Come down and let it just blend lightly. And now, by using it darkly at an edge, by using it a little bit thicker at the edges here, I can then bring it back with some clean water in a moment. So I want to just bring that raw sienna down there, ever so softly, just around the bottom edge here of the chin. And then I'm going to take some clean water and just blend that in with the water. Just blend it into the paper here. Right up to the eye, that's it, around there. So we can barely see the join. And then clean water and just soften it in so it's not quite pure white. Take the same colour and a little bit thicker, come back here and paint the whole of this. Now this paper I'm testing, yesterday he gave me a sheet, and so far I'm finding it very pleasant. It resists just a little bit of the first coat. So I'm getting a slightly waxy feel at the beginning, but once the paint is on, it's adhering well. So now you see how we've graduated through there. Now while this is still wet, I want to put a slightly richer, darker Indian red here to try and get a feeling of this warmer colour that comes right down the back of the grebe's ruff here, right up and through here into here. A little bit coming around the edges, little bits into there where it's still just damp, and by letting it fur out a little, we can get this feeling of the feathers without even using a different brush, which I'm going to be using later. Drop a bit more, a richer red into that still. I'm going to take some of the alizarin again and mix up with a little bit of the Indian red. Give myself a very warm. Drop that in there. You can see just by tickling it in how it's spreading out, giving me this effect. To go stronger still, so more of the same two colours, and I'm still dropping those in quite strongly here. There we go. And I'm going to put a little bit of fluffiness into there later. You can see I'm just dragging that tip of that brush through a fraction to get the slightly feathery feel, even though it's spreading a bit. Right back to here. There we are. Now the eye has that same colour going on, that rich brown into an orange here. So I'm going to take a little bit of cadmium orange and just, so if it's a small to paint, just paint that round the eye there, leaving the tiniest touch of white at the top because I want to leave a little bit of light just shining up there. There we are. Now back to here again. I'm going to take some of that warm and just now put a slight glazing in here. So I'm going to use it very thinly. It should be dry enough to take the paint now. Just put a little bit of this warmth as a glaze across the beak there, look. A bit darker, take the same Prussian blue and the burnt sienna again. And we're going to go just a little bit darker under here. So slightly heavier paint at the bottom edge, a little bit darker still. Get the feeling of this grebe's beak. Right, we'll leave that. We'll leave the eye for the minute, we don't go there yet. I'm going to start coming down this edge of the throat here, and it's very light, so I'm going to put a very thin wash of the raw sienna down here, very thin, almost white, all the way down there to get the paper to work. It's resisting slightly, so I'm having to get it slightly wetter first, and then I'm able to come in and add in along that lower edge this little bit of yellow, and we'll work into that in a moment, all the way down there, and that comes on. Now here again I want the same thing. I want a variation of golden yellow and browny yellow here, so I'm taking my water and just wetting that paper surface first, because this particular paper is resisting quite a bit. So I'm going to wet the whole of that bird with these lighter tones. I'm having to adjust my painting technique to the material, in other words, as I go along. Now it's a bit yellower down here, so I'm going to take a little bit of chrome yellow and put that across the bird, just mottling it along at the moment. This is my underpainting. You see how different that yellow is to the raw sienna. Not too yellow, but just yellow enough to... There we go, it's coming down to the water's edge here. I'll put some more in there later, right up round the back of the bird here. And I want some of this slightly warmer brown coming around the back of the bird with that yellow. This is giving me my underpainting for it. Comes right down to here. And it's also reflecting into the water, so while it's on my brush I'm going to paint this yellow just coming into the water down here as well, reflecting into this water here. A little bit of dry brush work there as I work it across. There we go. That's also dry brushing down here. Just see me pushing the brush across the surface of the paper to get this dry brush effect. Right. Now whilst that's still wet, we want to work into that again to get this slightly furry feel before I start using my textural brushes. So a little bit more of the Indian red, a touch of the alizarin, and we'll just start to bring in some of these warms into the background, let them fluff out here with the wet into wet technique, just letting those lights show. Comes right up there, through here, just fluffing slightly into the edge of the wet into wet neck. Little strokes, just feeling this fluffiness around with wet into wet technique. You see how lovely that is and how it can work and how the paint is doing the job for me. We don't have to copy it exactly, we can get these effects using that same colour down here in the reflection again to get the fluffiness, and we'll let that dry off a little bit. I want to go back into here and I want to use a little bit of purple now, a little bit of purple and my Prussian, just to get some of the cooler edges back here. You can see the paper resisting slightly, which is quite nice for the watery effects I want. I think we're going to be able to do quite well with the water for this, with this paint and with this paper. Let's just feel some of these textures working through here and there. It's the same sort of purple we had up here. Right, there we go. Nice effects we can get. And again we let that dry off a bit. And whilst that's drying a bit, we take some more of the Prussian and we'll just drop some of that in places, little feathery strokes back through here in the background. Just little touches, just letting it flow into the water, the other already wet areas. There we go. get this lovely effect of one colour into another and over another. Right, let that dry for the moment. Right, now I want to move on to refining that eye. Take a very small brush, and I don't use black, so I'm going to be using the Prussian blue yet again, and a bit of burnt umber to get as dark as I can. Maybe a little touch of the purple as well, just to give it a bit more depth. And we'll just try and get that pupil in here, leaving a little bit of light showing at the top, look. There we go. Maybe just go around the top a fraction, so a very small brush. Just to get these little details. There might be a little bit of dark around the outer eye as well. Gives this that shiny area. I'll just find the centre of the beak a bit too here. And with a bit of water, just bring that out, blend it in. I want to work on the head, on the crest, and what I'm going to do there is go back to my medium brush, take some ultramarine blue and put a coat of that, a wash of that on there first of all. You'll see why in a moment. Get this paper going, because I say it does resist quite a bit. The only thing I found about this paper so far, it's a little bit irritating in that it resists, but it also will have a useful effect in doing that with the water when I want to dry brush later. So it has its swings and roundabouts, so that's while we're trying this out, isn't it? To find out about these things. Right round here. And then, same thing again, dropping down the back of the head here. And let's take some of that deep Prussian blue now. Indigo or Prussian blue will do for this, doesn't matter which really. And mix that with a little bit of the burnt sienna again to make our dark. And we'll drop that all the way down here, right down around here. Get it moving into this paper. Comes up underneath the chin a bit here. Little tiny strokes now. Wash it in there. And using the edge of my brush, we'll just cut in at the tip of the brush to give the furry effect of the edge of this ruff. A bit bigger in places, very chunkier. That's that. Now, while I've still got that dark on my brush, this blue is just starting to dry out a little. I'm going to drop that back into here. You see the lovely effect we get as that mixes in wet into this crest. Comes down to there, dark around that edge, dropping more and more in as I go. There we go. We can come back again and drop a bit more in. I can come back into that in a moment and do a bit more fluffiness with the darks, but not quite yet. I just want a little bit more around this top edge here, just finding. Now on there, clean water on my brush, just take a little bit of this dark on my brush and thin it down and drag it into here, giving this furry effect for the head. So we start to get a bit more of this texture coming down here. And just into here. There we go. Wet into wet. Bit of water on there, so I just drop that in now to give the furry effect. And we'll just feel underneath the chin slightly. There we are. Now to carry on down here, so I'm going to make my same colour, the brown and the blue, and come down the neck a bit now. way down here, down the centre of it. You can see how that paper's still resisting a bit. Right down into here. And now I'm going to drag that brush into the white like this to start to give the fluffy feather effect. Coming down there, look, all the way down into there, just breaking it up, breaking it through, back up into here. A little bit of dry brushwork now over the top surfaces because it's a nice paper. It looks like a knot paper, so I'm not quite sure what this is. We'll discuss this more, but I've actually, I gave this to me to try and it's rather fun. But I'm not quite sure what paper it is yet. I quite like it. And we'll just start to bring in these fluffy effects of the darks here. A little bit more water on the brush because we're going to do some thinner areas as well. Dragging it in, showing these edges of these feathers like this. Great crested grebe on the Norfolk Broads as he swims past. Okay, I'm going to change brushes now. I'm going to start using this one, which is the new rake I've just brought. I'm getting the paint on the end of that, and I just want to get this furriness. Right, a little bit warmer, take a little bit of the brown and a wee bit of burnt sienna. A little bit of burnt sienna and a wee bit of the raw sienna together. Again, just dry it off a bit. And when you take this on, it's not stretched. Right, a little bit warmer, take a little bit of the brown and a wee bit of burnt sienna. A little bit of burnt sienna and a wee bit of the raw sienna together. Again, just dry it off a bit. And when you take this on, it's not stretched. And I want to start getting now a little bit more of the textures of these browns coming across the back. Here we go. Just crisscrossing, and we'll get the effect of these feathers. There we go, look, the fluffiness of these coming up. And into here the same. How fine we can go with this. Lovely little textural work. So what I liked about this rake when I tested it at the SAA is its fineness, that we can get these very, very fine marks, which are great for grasses and mosses, but are also very good for this sort of work. So if I go around in little patches like that, and little curves, I'll get the edges of the feathers better as well, look. So you can see the effects we can get. Coming around like that. Right down round to the edge of the water. Just dotting it on. Come down to here, a bit more warmth into it, a little bit more of the burnt sienna. We can really start to get some texture on the bird. Back to the dark again. So a useful little brush. I'm glad I got it in my set now to use. We can use it sideways, we can use it downwards, whichever you like. Right, our bird is actually almost done. All we need to do now is to wipe off the masking fluid to continue with this really. Right, now we come onto the water, and again we need to put some glazes on first. Now there's a little trick we could do here. I'm not going to do it today, but if I mixed some acrylic medium with my watercolour, I could put this wash on and it wouldn't shift afterwards, it wouldn't move afterwards. As it happens, I don't need to do that. I'm going to take some cobalt violet and literally give this a wash all over of that cobalt violet, right down around the bird. And we'll make use of this paper texture in a moment. Cobalt violet then, all the way over. Let those ripples come through. That's it. Now again, I'm going to want it to, and as it starts to dry, just at the right time, I have to come into it and start dropping in some cerulean blue and turquoise. Got a very nice turquoise that you know I'm very fond of if you've been watching my other films. Just put a little bit on now, look, to show you. It's a beautiful colour. And we're just going to let it, I'm working on the verticals, we're just going to let it spread slightly into here. Little tips of the brush, I'm just using my oval mop, the tip of it, just to paint in and let them work down these streaks of the turquoise. Little touches. And then we'll go into more detail in just a moment. Just knowing how much paint to put on before it's just little touches, otherwise it's going to spread too far. Just little touches of the paint, not too much. We've even got a little bit of it coming into the bird itself here, so we'll just drop a little bit of that cool, that turquoise, to reflect into the bird. Tiniest amount. Now we'll let that dry off. Okay, this paper's now dry enough. Slight dampness to it, but nothing much. So I'm going to take my medium round again and come back and start working on these waves. Now, we're on to smaller areas of the waves now. In fact, before I start on my medium round, I'm going to go back to my oval mop. Just take a little bit of the purple. I just want to come down a fraction with this, the purple, and a little touch of actually cerulean now. I used turquoise before, so purple and a little touch of cerulean. Funny mixture, but let's see what we get. Yes, that's quite nice. Maybe a touch of yellow ochre into that, just to make it a slightly more grey colour. There we are. Now I want to get some of these effects of the waves coming through onto here, leaving little bits of light shining through. So we'll just drag the edge of the brush across, tip of the brush, right from the bird all the way, little wavelets, building up this effect of the lights and darks behind, coming out of here. Some of it's larger than others, other areas, quite large areas coming out here, quite a large wave coming up there from here. So we've got quite a nice mixture of a yellowy grey here, the tip of the brush, edge of this lovely mop sideways. The beauty of this is that it gives me the opportunity to use little strokes, fine strokes, as well if I press harder, much larger strokes like that. Leaving little bits of light just shining. There we go. Don't get smaller ones and larger ones. That comes right through from back here. In fact, there's a dark area there that comes all the way through those. I want to get this right all the way through these bits of masking fluid. Let's mix some more paint up again. A little bit of the purple, a little bit of the cerulean blue, a little bit of the raw sienna. coming round here. Careful up the edges, don't leave a halo, but come right up to the edges like that. If I use my brush that way, look, I can just flick in. The idea of these ripples coming round here, carefully done, right up to the edge of the bird. We do need these darks against the bird now to make the white of that bird stand out. And these colours are going to get a little bit stronger as I go on. You'll see what I'm going to do in a moment, while it's still wet as well. Right round the bird here, little reflections. All these darks to come right up to the bird. The feeling of this ellipse happening around it. Lovely, using the edge of the brush a bit more now, look, you see, as I paint these larger areas on. There we go. Now while that's still wet, take a quick shot with my camera. While that's still wet, I'm going to make a slightly deeper blue. Take a little bit of the Prussian and the ultramarine and just drop in here softly. I'll make it a bit harder in a moment. Just drop in to get some soft effects. A little bit of the Prussian and the ultramarine. Down into here. Right down around the bird. While it's still wet. You see this lovely effect we're starting to get now of the lights against the darks. So I'm going slightly softer here, aren't I, in places? Just letting this blend in, these background effects of these waves. And you'll see that where I paint wet onto dry, we get a hard edge, and where I paint wet onto wet, we get a soft edge. So as I bring these little ripples and waves through here, where it's dry I'm getting a harder edge, and where it's wet I'm getting a softer edge. I think you start to see the effect I'm after now. And again we've got to let that dry off a bit. Right, we've got the mid-tones in, and now we need to start doing the final darker ones. What I'm going to do now is just remove the masking fluid, and we'll bring back these little bits of white, because I need to go around those with a bit of dark. Same here for the bird, a bit of white under the bird there. And now we will go to that slightly smaller brush, the medium one. And I'm going to make up a similar colour to what I was doing before, but this time with the ultramarine with some raw sienna, which will give me that slightly yellowy, just off the green, slightly darker wash, which I can now put over this, working up to the bird. Let that come down and in, and you notice now it's the wet paint on the dry paper which is giving me a harder edge to my lines, so I can paint in more detail. Slightly broken effects for the ripples coming outwards here. I'm going to go darker yet in places around the bird to help silhouette it out. Building up the watercolour in layers. dark behind here, coming up under these feathers. Can work those feathers in now. Quite a big stroke there, which is breaking down then into the wavelets as it comes out here. You see I'm using a little bit of dry brushwork now as well. In other words, I'm just letting the brush drag across the paper a bit here. We don't want to make outlines, but we'll just break this neck up a little by adding a slight line to the edge of it in places. Now, I was talking about these bubbles earlier. To make it a little bit more purple. A bit of browning. A little bit of bouncy yellow into it now. So I want some real darks again. I'll just look at these darks here. And fluffiness bits again. And also around these bubbles, because there's something we haven't yet done. These little light areas of the bubbles here, I do want to get those showing a bit more now. There were some little bubbles, little strokes. We could use that small rake brush, but I'm just trying to get away with using this brush for these final few strokes. Just darkening down a few bits here and there. Now the paint has sunk, which watercolour of course will. We know that that watercolour is going to sink slightly. So, and our bird is almost there, and you saw how quickly we produced that. Finer reflections and darks going in. Put a little bit of the warm back in a minute as well. Now, just a little bit of warm. So take some raw sienna. Just come back in with that warm. Maybe a touch of, maybe a little bit yellower, a little touch of cadmium orange coming in here. And there's our painting of the grebe, done fairly easily. We won't go any warmer than that. It's good enough. So a small brush. And we'll just put a little signature right